Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became the shadow god Shinigami and got married with Yoruichi Shihōin? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Death's Embrace. Pain bloomed through Naruto's body as the last of his chakra drained away. Battlefield sounds faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The fourth great ninja war had been won, but at a price he now understood all too well. So this is how it ends, he whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. Kurama, the nine-tailed fox that had been his constant companion, stirred weakly within him. Their final gambit had worked. Kagaya was sealed, the allied shinobi forces saved, but the cost had been their shared life force. We did well, kid. Yeah, Naruto managed, a smile forming despy. The darkness creeping across his vision. We did, didn't we? His friends' faces flashed before him. Sasuke, finally redeemed. Sakura, her healing chakra exhausted trying to save him. Kakashi, pride evident even behind his mask. He'd fulfilled his promise to become Hokage, if only for a day. One glorious, terrible day. The darkness swallowed him whole. What came next wasn't the nothingness he'd expected. Instead, Naruto felt himself falling through an endless void, wisps of something that resembled chakra but felt fundamentally different swirling around him. A presence waited at the bottom of that void. Ancient, patient, expectant. You have arrived at last, it spoke, not in words but directly into his consciousness. The one who would inherit my burden. Who are you? Naruto asked. Findi. He could speak despite lacking a physical form. I am that which has always been. I am the end of all things. I am Shinigami. The darkness parted, revealing a spectral figure draped in white robes, face concealed behind a demonic mask. The death god of legend, the very entity used in the Reaper death seal that had claimed his father's life. Your sacrifice mirrors my own, the Shinigami continued. A vessel willingly emptied so that others might continue. Such is the nature of gods and heroes. I'm no god, Naruto protested. I'm just a shinobi who couldn't let his friends die. A sound like distant laughter echoed. And that is precisely why you are worthy. Before Naruto could respond, the Shinigami reached forward with one ghostly hand and pressed a finger to where Naruto's forehead would be if he still had form. My time has reached its end. The balance requires a Shinigami, and you shall take my place. Not all at once. That would destroy what remains of your soul, but gradually, as you learn to wield death's authority. The vessel I prepared awaits you in the realm between realms. Wait, I didn't agree to this. Naruto tried to back away, but in this formless state, there was nowhere to retreat. You agreed with your final act, Uzumaki Naruto. Now go forth and discover what it means to be more than human, yet less than divine. The realm of souls awaits its new guardian. The Shinigami's form dissipated into thousands of glowing fragments that swirled around Naruto, seeping into the essence of what remained of him. Pain erupted once more, but different, like being unmade and reforged simultaneously. Wait, Naruto screamed into the void, but the Shinigami was gone. And then, so was he. Naruto awakened face down in dirt. Actual dirt. He could smell the earthy scent, feel the grit against his cheek. He had a body again. Though it felt strange, somehow lighter yet more substantial than before. He pushed himself to his knees, then stood, taking stock of his surroundings. He appeared to be in some sort of village. Though unlike any he'd seen before, the architecture reminded him vaguely of Fire Country's older settlements, wooden buildings with tiled roofs, dirt streets, but everything seemed weathered. Almost timeless. People in worn, simple clothing moved about, paying him little attention despite his sudden appearance. Where am I? He wondered aloud, surprised to hear his own voice again. Looking down, he found himself wearing a black kimono and hakama. A weight at his hip drew his attention to a katana, its sheath plain black with silver fittings. When he reached for it instinctively, something resonated within him, like the distant echo of the Shinigami's presence. Hey, you new here or something? Naruto turned to find a young boy, no older than 12, regarding him with open curiosity. Yeah, I guess you could say that, Naruto replied, smiling despite his confusion. What is this place? The boy looked at him like he'd asked what color the sky was. This is Rukongai, of course. The 78th district, Inazuri. The boy's eyes narrowed. Wait, are you a Shinigami? You're dressed like one, but you don't seem to know where you are. Before Naruto could process what the boy had called him, a commotion erupted further down the street. Shouts and crashes, followed by the sound of breaking wood. Oh no, the boy whispered, face paling. It's the Tsuji gang again. Naruto's attention snapped to the disturbance. 3 large men were terrorizing a fruit vendor, appending his cart and threatening him with crude weapons, a rusty sword, a heavy club, and in the leader's hand, a short knife that gleamed with surprising sharpness. Please, I've paid my protection already this week. The vendor pleaded, cowering as his livelihood was scattered across the dirt. Rates gone up, growled the leader, a hulking man with a scarred face. Soul Society's getting dangerous these days. Extra protection costs extra, get it? Without thinking, Naruto was moving. In life, he'd been Hokage. However briefly, the instinct to protect hadn't died with his body. Hey, he called out, stopping a few paces from the thugs. That's enough. The 3 men turned, momenta. Riley surprised by the interruption before breaking into ugly laughter. Look here, boys, the leader sneered. A baby Shinigami playing hero. Where's your squad, kid? Get lost on your way back to the Seraite. Naruto felt strangely calm despite not understanding half the man's words. Something inside him, not Kurama, whose presence he could no longer feel, but something else, something ancient, stirred. I said that's enough, Naruto repeated, voice dropping lower. Leave the man alone. The leader spat on the ground. Make me. What happened next surprised even Naruto. As the leader charged, knife thrusting forward, Naruto simply moved, not with the familiar rush of chakra-enhanced speed, but something different, a step that seemed to bend space itself. He reappeared behind the thug, one hand gripping the man's wrist, stopping the knife mid-strike. The leader gasped, not from pain but from the sudden cold that spread from Naruto's touch, a cold that reached deeper than skin. What the hell? The man started, before Naruto twisted his wrist, forcing him to drop the knife. The other 2 rushed in. Naruto moved again, that same strange stepping technique carrying him between them. A palm strike to one's chest sent him flying backwards with surprising force. The other swung his club wildly, but Naruto caught it one-handed, the wood frosting over where his fingers touched. What are you? The club wielder whispered, eyes wide with fear. Naruto wasn't sure himself. He felt power flowing through him, not chakra but something both colder and more vibrant. It responded to his will intuitively, as though it had always been part of him. Someone who doesn't like bullies, Naruto answered, breaking the club with a squeeze of his hand. Now go. The 3 didn't need further encouragement. They scrambled away, casting fearful glances back at Naruto as they fled. The street had gone silent. The vendor stared at Naruto with a mixture of gratitude and trepidation. Others who had stopped to watch the confrontation kept their distance, whispering among themselves. Thank you, Shinigami-sama, the vendor finally said, bowing deeply. I'm not. Naruto began, then stopped. According to the Shinigami's words and what he'd just experienced, perhaps he was becoming exactly that. Don't mention it, he finished instead, helping the man gather his scattered fruit. As he worked, Naruto became aware of a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the feeling of being watched. He straightened and scanned the surrounding rooftops, catching only a brief flash of movement, a silhouette with flowing dark hair disappearing over a ridge. Something told him this wouldn't be the last unusual encounter in this strange afterlife. Days passed as Naruto acclimated to Rukongai. He learned he was in Soul Society, the afterlife where human souls resided. The village-like districts of Rukongai surrounded the walled city of Seraite, home to the Gote 13, the military organization of So. Ul Reapers are Shinigami who maintained order and guided souls to the afterlife. What he couldn't figure out was why he possessed Shinigami powers without any training, or why the sword at his hip, a Zanpakuto. He'd learned it was called, felt like an extension of his being despite never having drawn it. He'd taken to sleeping in abandoned buildings and helping locals in exchange for information. The people of Inazuri lived hard lives. Despite being dead, hunger, thirst, and hardship followed them even into the afterlife if they possessed spiritual energy, and Naruto discovered he could ease they are suffering somewhat with his growing abilities. On his 5th night, as Naruto sat alone on a hilltop overlooking the district, the sensation of being watched returned stronger than ever. "You might as well come out," he called without turning. "You've been following me for days." A soft laugh answered him, followed by the lightest whisper of footsteps on grass. "Most Shinigami can't detect me when I don't wish to be detected. You're either very good or very different." Naruto turned to find a woman standing a few paces away. She moved with the fluid grace of an experienced fighter, but it was her appearance that momentarily left him speechless. Dark skin contrasted with striking golden eyes and purple hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a sleeveless black garment that hugged her athletic form, and an orange over jacket. Her stance was casual, but Naruto recognized the readiness in it. She could spring into action instantly if needed. "Both, I think," Naruto replied, recovering his composure. "Though I'm still figuring out what I am exactly." The woman's eyebrows rose. "Interesting answer." She approached and dropped gracefully to sit beside him, seemingly unconcerned about potential threats. "I'm Yoruichi Shihōin, Naruto Uzumaki." "So, Naruto Uzumaki," she said, golden eyes studying him intently, "want to explain how someone with your level of spiritual pressure is hidden out in the 78th district instead of wearing a captain's haori in the Seraite?" Naruto considered deflecting but decided on honesty. Something about this woman inspired trust, and he desperately needed answers. "I died," he began simply. "In battle, saving my friends. But instead of whatever's supposed to happen next, I met the Shinigami. The actual death god. He said his time was ending, and I'd been chosen to take his place." Naruto ran a hand through his spiky blonde hair. "Then I woke up here, with these powers I barely understand and memories that keep shifting." He expected disbelief or mockery. Instead, Yoruichi's eyes widened slightly, the only indication she was affected by his story. "The Shinigami King himself spoke to you?" she asked quietly. "That's unprecedented. You believe me?" Yoruichi's lips curved into a smile. "I've lived long enough to know when something impossible is actually just improbable. Besides," she gestured vaguely toward him, "your spiritu al pressure isn't like anything I've ever felt. It has echoes, layers, like something ancient overlaid on something new." She leaned back on her hands, looking up at the night sky. "The legend says the Shinigami King isn't eternal. That eventually, like all things, even death must change form. But most dismiss it as myth." Naruto's hand unconsciously drifted to the sword at his hip. "I haven't even drawn this yet. I'm afraid of what might happen." Yoruichi's gaze followed the movement. "A Zanpakuto is a reflection of its wielder's soul. If you truly are becoming what you say, that blade might be significant." "Why are you helping me?" Naruto asked suddenly. "You don't know me." Yoruichi laughed, a sound both light and full of mischief. "Who says I'm helping you? Maybe I'm just curious, or maybe I'm evaluating a potential threat." Her expression sobered. "But if you want the truth, it's because change is coming to Soul Society. I can feel it, and you, Naruto Uzumaki, are either going to be part of that change or the cause of it." Before Naruto could respond, a distant explosion rocked the night, followed by screams. Both were on their feet instantly. "That came from the lower district," Naruto said, already moving. Yoruichi matched his pace effortlessly. "Let's see what you can do, future death god." Chaos greeted them in the market square. A massive creature unlike anything Naruto had seen before towered over fleeing souls. It resembled a giant praying mantis with a bone-white mask where its face should be, and a gaping hole through its torso. Each swing of its blade, forelimbs cut through buildings as though they were paper. "Hollow," Yoruichi explained tersely. "A corrupted soul that feeds on others. That one's particularly large, an Ijuka's class." The hollow turned toward a group of children too terrified to move. Its mask split into a horrific grin as it raised a bladed limb. Naruto didn't think. That strange stepping technique, flash step, his instincts supplied the name, carried him between the hollow and its prey in an instant. He caught the descending blade with his bare hand, a shock wave of spiritual pressure erupting from the impact. "Get them out of here," He called to Yoruichi, who was already moving, gathering the children and speeding them to safety with flash steps of her own. The hollow roared, its free limbs swinging toward Naruto's unprotected side. He released the first blade and spun away, the attack missing him by inches. Landing in a crouch, Naruto assessed his opponent. The creature was fast and powerful, but predictable, like fighting one of the less intelligent summoning beasts. "You smell different," the hollow hissed, its voice grating and unnatural. "Not Shinigami, not human, not hollow. What are you, little morsel? I was hoping you wouldn't talk," Naruto muttered. "The ugly ones always want to chat." The hollow roared again and charged. Naruto raised his hand, channeling the cold power he'd been experimenting with. A blast of dark energy shot from his palm, catching the hollow in its mask. The creature stumbled but didn't fall. That tickled, it mocked, though a crack had appeared in its mask. "My turn." He ground beneath Naruto erupted as a third, hidden limb burst up from below. He twisted aside, but not quickly enough. The blade sliced along his ribs, tearing through the black kimono and drawing blood. Pain flared, but strangely, Naruto felt something else alongside it, a surge of that cold power responding to his injury, sealing the wound almost immediately. More intriguing was how the injury seemed to clarify his thoughts, burning away the fog that had clouded parts of his memory since arriving. "That's new," he murmured, touching the already closing wound. "Stop playing with it," Yoruichi called from atop a nearby roof. Having returned from evacuating the children, hollows that size require a Zanpakuto to purify. Naruto's hand moved to his sword hilt. The moment his fingers wrapped around it, a pulse of energy traveled up his arm, and he heard a whisper in his mind, a voice both familiar and alien. "Draw me." He drew the blade in one fluid motion. The Zanpakuto revealed itself, a SL-eke katana with a black blade that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The guard was shaped like a spiral, reminiscent of the symbol he'd worn in life, and the hilt wrapped in orange cord. The moment the blade fully cleared its sheath, Naruto's spiritual pressure exploded outward. The ground beneath him cracked, and shadows from every object in the area stretched toward him as if drawn by gravity. The hollow paused its attack, sensing the change. "What is this? What are you?" Naruto felt knowledge flowing into him from the blade, techniques, forms, the proper way to channel his power. The sword wasn't teaching him. It was reminding him of things the part of him that was becoming Shinigami already knew. "I am the shadow at the end of all things," Naruto found himself saying, words oming from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "I am the final embrace that awaits every soul." He raised the blade, which began to emit black energy like smoke. "Pierce the veil between worlds, Kujmayo." The transformation was instant. The katana elongated and curved slightly, its black blade now etched with silver runes that glowed with inner light. The guard expanded into an intricate pattern of interlocking spirals, and the blade itself seemed to exist partially in another dimension, its edges blurring into shadow. Yoruichi's eyes widened. "Shikai on the first draw," she whispered. "Impossible." The hollow, sensing its peril, attacked with desperate fury. All three bladed limbs converged on Naruto from different angles. He didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped forward into the attack, his body dissolving into shadow as the limbs passed harmlessly through him. He reformed behind the hollow, Kujmayo trailing darkness as he swung. The blade connected with the creature's back, and instead of cutting through flesh, it seemed to pass through the hollow's very essence. The creature froze, black lines spreading from the point of contact across its entire form. "What have you done?" it gasped. "Sent you where you need to go," Naruto answered, feeling strangely peaceful. "Not destruction, purification." The hollow dissolved, not into nothingness but into particles of light that floated skyward. Naruto knew, somehow, that the soul at its core had been cleansed, its human essence freed to enter the cycle properly. As the last motes of light faded, Naruto felt a wave of exhaustion hit him. Kujmayo returned to its sealed katana form, and he nearly stumbled before catching himself. Yoruichi appeared at his side, one hand steadying his elbow. "That was not standard Shinigami procedure," she said, her tone carefully neutral but her eyes alive with curiosity. "Yeah, well," Naruto managed a tired grin, "I've never been good at following procedure." She studied him for a moment before breaking into a smile. I think Soul Society just got a lot more interesting. After the hollow incident, Yoruichi suggested, in a tone that brooked no argument, that Naruto should relocate to a safer district. Curious about his powers and increasingly convinced his story might be true, she led him to an abandoned shrine in the forest bordering the first district of Rukongai. This place has been forgotten by most, she explained as they approached the weathered stone structure nearly hidden among ancient trees. It was once a site where souls came to pay respects to the Shinigami key. Before that practice faded from memory, Naruto felt an immediate connection to the shrine. As they crossed the threshold, the shadows in the corners seemed to stir in greeting. It feels familiar, he said quietly. Yoruichi nodded. I thought it might. If you really are becoming what you claim, this place belongs to you more than anyone. The interior was simple but spacious, with a large central room and several smaller chambers. Dust covered every surface, but the structure itself was sound. In the main hall stood a stone altar, and behind it, a faded painting depicted a figure in flowing robes. Face obscured by a demonic mask, the traditional image of the Shinigami. Naruto approached the painting, drawn to it involuntarily. When his fingers touched the canvas, the eyes in the painted mask briefly glowed. And he jerked his hand back. This place will do, he said, turning away from the unsettling image. But I can't hide forever. Sooner or later, others will sense my presence. Especially after that display with the hollow. Yoruichi leaned against a pillar, arms crossed. You're right, which is why we need to prepare you. Her golden eyes gleamed in the dim light. I was on. CE the commander of the Onmitsukido, Soul Society's covert ops force, and captain of the 2nd Division. I can teach you what you need to know about this world, how to control your powers, and how to navigate the politics when the time comes. Naruto raised an eyebrow. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Yoruichi's smile was mysterious. Let's just say I have a vested interest in shaking up the established order. Soul Society has grown stagnant, set in its ways. The emergence of a new Shinigami king, or whatever you're becoming, could be exactly the catalyst needed for real change. She pushed off from the pillar and approached him. Besides, I've never trained a god before. Sounds like fun. The casual way she referred to his potential fate made Naruto uncomfortable. I'm not a god, I'm just Naruto. Are you, though? Yoruichi challenged softly. The Naruto who died saving his friends, yes. But also something more now. I can see it in your eyes, there's an ancient wisdom beginning to awaken there. Alongside your human experiences, her words hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Since drawing Kujmayo, Naruto had felt memories and knowledge that weren't his own surfacing in his mind, glimpses of millennia of watching over the balance between worlds, of guiding souls to their proper place in the cycle. What if I don't want this? He asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since his arrival. Yoruichi's expression softened slightly. Based on my experience, the universe rarely cares what we want. But it tends to choose those who can handle the burden. She placed a hand on his shoulder. The touch surprisingly gentle from someone who radiated such strength. Get some rest. Training begins tomorrow. As she turned to leave, Naruto called after her. You're not what I expected from someone with your background. Yoruichi paused at the doorway, twilight silhouetting her form. And what did you expect? Someone more rigid, traditional. She laughed, the sound echoing through the empty shrine. That's why I left the Seraite, Naruto Uzumaki. I never did fit their mold. With a flash of movement too quick to follow, she was gone, leaving only disturbed dust motes swirling in her wake. Alone in the shrine, Naruto explored the smaller chambers, finding one suitable for sleeping. As he settled onto the floor, his Zanpakuto propped against the wall nearby. He felt the sword's presence in his mind, not intrusive, but watchful, patient. We have much to learn together, Kujmayo's voice whispered in his thoughts. Who are you, really? Naruto asked aloud. Are you the Shinigami's power? Or mine? I am both and neither. I am the shadow cast by your soul, shaped by what you were and what you are becoming. The Shinigami King chose you because your essence was compatible with his power, your determination to protect, your willingness to sacrifice, your understanding of both light and darkness. Will I lose myself? This was Naruto's deepest fear, Duh. The person he had been would be subsumed by the ancient power he now carried. No, came the firm reply. That is why you were chosen. Your identity is strong enough to contain this power without being erased by it. You will change, certainly, as all beings do with new experiences. But you will remain Naruto Uzumaki, even as you become more. The answer provided some comfort, and Naruto drifted toward sleep. His dreams filled with shadowy realms between worlds and countless souls passing through his domain. The following weeks fell into a rhythm. Each morning, Yoruichi arrived at the shrine to train Naruto in controlling his spiritual pressure, flash step techniques, and Zanpakuto combat. The afternoons were spent exploring the nature of his unique powers, which didn't always follow the rules governing normal Shinigami abilities. Again, Yoruichi commanded, standing across from him in a forest clearing that showed the scars of their previous sparring sessions. Focus on maintaining your form while using the shadow step. Naruto concentrated, drawing on the technique he'd been developing, a variation of flash step that involved briefly converting his body to shadow. Unlike standard flash step, which was merely extreme speed, shadow step allowed him to pass through solid objects and emerge anywhere shadows existed. He dissolved into darkness, flowing across the clearing in reform, behind Yoruichi, only to find her already pivoted to face him, her foot connecting with his chest before he fully materialized. Too slow on the reformation, she critiqued as he tumbled backward. Your consciousness needs to transfer faster. In battle, that split second is the difference between victory and death. Naruto picked himself up, brushing dirt from his clothes. After weeks of training, he'd abandoned the traditional Shinigami uniform for something that felt more natural, black pants and a fitted orange and black jacket over a mesh shirt, reminiscent of what he'd worn in life but adapted for his new abilities. It's harder when you're not just moving yourself, but reshaping your entire being, he countered, but without real frustration. Yoruichi was a demanding teacher, but an effective one. The enemies you'll eventually face won't care about the difficulty, she replied, though a hint of a smile softened her words. Again, as they continued training, Naruto felt Kujimayo's presence grow stronger in his mind. The Zanpakuto was unusual. Most Shinigami had to work for years to hear their sword's voice, but Kujimayo had spoken to him from the beginning. Yet full synchronization remained elusive. You're still holding back, Yoruichi observed during a water break. You're afraid of the power. Naruto stared into the small stream where they'd paused. Wouldn't you be? Every time I draw more power, more of him comes with it. Yoruichi sat beside him, unusually contemplative. When I was younger, I was heir to the Shihōin clan, one of Seoul society's great noble houses. Everyone expected me to be a perfect lady, to eventually marry strategically and continue the bloodline. When I showed talent as a Shinigami, that was acceptable only as long as I maintained the dignity befitting my station. She picked up a stone and skipped it across the water. I rejected all of it. Became the least dignified noble you can imagine. Shocked everyone by joining the Onmitsukido. Then worked my way up to captain through sheer ability. Later, I gave it all up to help a friend, became an exile. She glanced at him. My point is, expectations don't define you. Neither does power or position. What matters is what you do with what you're given. It's not the same, Naruto argued. You were still yourself, making choices. I'm changing into something else. Are you? Yoruichi challenged. The Naruto I've come to know these past weeks seems remarkably consistent. Stubborn, compassionate, determined to protect others, and completely unable to back down from a challenge. Her golden eyes held his gaze. Those qualities aren't diminishing as your power grows. If anything, they're becoming more defined. Naruto couldn't help smiling at her assessment. When did you get so insightful? I'm over 200 years old, kid. You pick up a few things. She stood fluidly. Now, let's work on your Bankai. Bankai. But that takes decades for most Shinigami to achieve. Yoruichi smirked. You're not. Most Shinigami. Besides, I helped Kazuki develop a method to achieve Bankai in 3 days. If anyone can handle an accelerated timeline, it's you. Before they could begin this new phase of training, a pulse of unfamiliar spiritual pressure washed over the clearing. Both tensed, turning toward its source. 3 figures in black Shinigami uniforms stood at the edge of the trees. 2 wore standard attire, but the central figure, A slender woman with short hair and a stern expression, wore a white haori over her uniform, marking her as a captain. Captain Soi Fan, Yoruichi acknowledged, her casual demeanor shifting to something more guarded. Lady Yoruichi, the captain replied, her tone formal but eyes betraying complex emotions. The head captain requests your presence, both of you, in the seraite. Immediately, Naruto stepped forward, and if we decline the invitation, Soi Fan's cold gaze shifted to him. Then I am authorized to use whatever force necessary to compel your attendance. Her hand moved to the short sword at her waist. Though I would prefer to avoid conflict with Lady Yoruichi's associate. Yoruichi placed a restraining hand on Naruto's arm. It was only a matter of time. She murmured, the head captain has sensed your presence. Better to face this directly than hide. Naruto nodded, tension evident in his stance but resolve clear in his eyes. Lead the way, Captain. Quote, as they followed the Shinigami escorts toward the imposing walls of the seraite, Naruto felt Kujmayo's presence strengthen, as if the sword sensed approaching conflict. Remember who you are, the Zanpakuto whispered in his mind. Both who you were and who you are becoming. The gates to the heart of Soul Society loomed ahead, and with them, the next chapter in Naruto's unexpected afterlife. The seraite was nothing like Rukongai. Where the outer districts were reminiscent of feudal villages, the inner sanctum of Soul Society resembled a pristine fortress city. White stone buildings connected by elevated walkways stretched as far as Naruto could see, all converging on a massive central tower that dominated the skyline. Impressive, isn't it? Yoruichi commented, noting his gaze. The seraite has stood unchanged for millennia. Some say that's its strength. Others, like me, think it's a problem. Captain Soi Fan, walking ahead of them, visibly stiffened at the remark but remained silent. As they proceeded deeper into the city, Shinigami stopped to stare at them, or more specifically, at Naruto. He could hear whispers following in their wake. That spiritual pressure. Is he really what they're saying? The new death god. Naruto maintained a calm exterior despite his discomfort with the attention. Yoruichi had coached him on the importance of projecting confidence here. Any sign of weakness would be exploited in the political arena they were entering. They arrived at the 1st Division headquarters, an imposing structure whose entrance was guarded by Shinigami of unusually strong spiritual pressure. Inside, they were led down long hallways to a pair of massive doors emblazoned with the symbol of the Gote 13. The head captain awaits, Soi Fan announced formally. I advise respectful behavior. Though her words were directed at both, her gaze lingered on Naruto. The doors swung open to reveal a spacious chamber. At its far end, seated on a simple raised platform, was an elderly man with a long beard and bald head, heavily scarred across one eye. Despite his aged appearance, the spiritual pressure emanating from him was staggering, a constant, controlled inferno of power that filled the room. Flanking him were other captains, each radiating their own distinctive power. Naruto counted 8 in total, representing different divisions of the Gote 13. Yoruichi Shihōin, the old man's voice resonated through the chamber. It has been some time since you graced these halls. Head Captain Yamamoto, Yoruichi replied with a casual bow that somehow managed to be both respectful and slightly irreverent. I go where events of interest take me. Yamamoto's attention shifted to Naruto, his gaze intense and evaluating. You have brought us something of great interest indeed. Step forward, young one. Naruto moved ahead of Yoruichi, meeting the ancient Shinigami's gaze without flinching. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. So we have been informed. Yamamoto replied. What is less clear is exactly what you are. Your spiritual signature contains elements I have not encountered in my 3,000 years. A tall captain with long white hair stepped forward. Unlike most others in the room, his expression was genuinely curious rather than suspicious. The reports say you claim to be the successor to the Shinigami King himself. Is this true? I didn't claim anything, Naruto replied carefully. I died in battle. The Shinigami appeared and said his time was ending, and I would inherit his role. Then I woke up here. With powers I'm still learning to control. Murmurs spread among the assembled captains. A large man with spiky hair and an eye patch laughed openly. Sounds like bullshit to me, he said bluntly. Why don't we test these powers of his? Captain Zaraki, Yamamoto admonished, though without much force. There will be time for such assessment. Actually, Naruto interjected, surprising many with his boldness. I have questions of my own. Why am I here? Am I being accused of something, or is this just curiosity about the new arrival? A shorter captain with white hair spoke up, his tone cold. You represent an unknown variable in a system of balance that has existed for millennia. Your spiritual pressure alone has disrupted the flow of souls in 3 districts. That makes you a potential threat until proven otherwise. Yoruichi stepped forward. Captain Hitsugaya, I've been training him for weeks. His control improves daily, and his intentions are hardly threatening. Your judgment in these matters has been questionable before, Yoruichi Shihōin, replied a severe-looking captain with a modified uniform. Or have you forgotten the circumstances of your departure from Soul Society? Before tensions could escalate further, Yamamoto tapped his wooden staff on the floor, silencing the room. The concerns of the Gote 13 are valid, as is Yoruichi's testimony regarding your character, he said, addressing Naruto directly. Therefore, you will remain under observation within the Seraite while we determine the full extent of your abilities and the veracity of your claim. Naruto felt Kujmayo stir at his hip, responding to his rising frustration. With all due respect, I'm not a prisoner or a test subject. I came willingly out of courtesy, but I won't be detained against my will. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Yamamoto's spiritual pressure intensified. You misunderstand, Naruto Uzumaki, the head captain said, his voice deceptively mild. This is not a negotiation. The balance between worlds is our primary responsibility. If you truly are becoming what you claim, then you must understand that such power cannot go unmonitored, especially in one so inexperienced. Naruto's own spiritual pressure began to rise in response, shadows in the corners of the room stretching toward him unconsciously. Several captains tensed, hands moving toward their zanpakuto. Yoruichi placed a warning hand on Naruto's shoulder. Perhaps a compromise, she suggested smoothly. Naruto stays as a guest, not a prisoner, with freedom to move within the Seraite but with an escort from the Gote 13. This allows for observation while respecting his autonomy. Yamamoto considered this, his ancient eyes never leaving Naruto's. Acceptable, with one addition. He will participate in controlled demonstrations of his abilities so we may better understand the nature of his power. And who decides what controlled means? Naruto asked, still wary. The white-haired captain who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. I would be willing to oversee such demonstrations. Captain Yukitaki of the 13th Division, he introduced himself with a slight bow. I have some knowledge of historical texts regarding the Shinigami king that might prove relevant. Something about Yukitaki's genuine interest and lack of hostility resonated with Naruto. That seems fair. Then it is decided, Yamamoto declared. Captain Yukitaki will serve as liaison. Quarters will be prepared in the 13th Division compound. The first assessment will take place tomorrow. His gaze swept the room. Dismissed. As the captains filed out, some casting curious or suspicious glances at Naruto, Yoruichi leaned close to whisper, that went better than expected. Yukitaki is fair and scholarly, a good ally to have. And what about you? Naruto asked quietly, will you be allowed to stay? A complicated expression crossed Yoruichi's face. My status here is complicated. But don't worry, I won't be far. Her golden eyes glinted with mischief. You couldn't keep me away from this if you tried. Before Naruto could respond, Captain Yukitaki approached them, his manner friendly despite the tension that had filled the chamber moments before. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your quarters, he offered. And perhaps you might indulge my curiosity about your experiences. The 10 records regarding the Shinigami king are fragmentary at best. As they left the 1st Division headquarters, Naruto felt numerous eyes following them. Some merely curious, others calculating, and a few unmistakably hostile. Whatever happened next, he'd clearly been thrust into a complex web of power and politics unlike anything he'd encountered in life. But one thing remained certain, he would face it with the same determination that had defined him as Hokage of Konoha. If this was his new path, he would walk it on his own terms. The 13th Division compound proved to be one of the more welcoming areas of the Seraite. Situated near a large lake, its buildings were designed with an emphasis on natural harmony rather than imposing authority. Captain Yukitake led Naruto to a small but comfortable guest house overlooking the water. I hope this will be suitable, Yukitake said, sliding open the door to reveal a traditional space with simple, elegant furnishings. I've arranged for privacy, though there will be guards posted nearby, for your protection as much as anything else. Naruto recognized the diplomatic phrasing but appreciated the effort. Thank you, Captain. It's more than adequate. Yukitake hesitated, then added. I should mention that while Yoruichi Shihōin is welcome to visit during daylight hours, her presence after dark would create political complications. Her history with Soul Society is complex. So I've gathered, Naruto replied. Though she hasn't shared many details. It's not my story to tell, Yukitake said diplomatically. But know that despite her exile, many of us still hold her in high regard. He moved toward the door. Rest tonight. Tomorrow will bring many questions. After the captain left, Naruto explored his temporary home. The furnishings were sparse but of high quality. A sleeping mat, a low table, simple cushions. A small adjoining room contained bathing facilities, and a covered porch offered a view of the lake, now reflecting the evening sky. He had just settled on the porch, Kujimayo beside him, when a black cat leapt silently onto the railing. Subtle entrance, Naruto commented, not entirely surprised. The cat's golden eyes gleamed with intelligence. One of my specialties. In a puff of smoke, the cat transformed into Yoruichi, now wearing a simple black garment that complemented her dark skin. That's a useful trick, Naruto observed, raising an eyebrow. Another skill you neglected to mention during training. Yoruichi shrugged, settling beside him. Can't reveal all my secrets at once. Besides, it's a rare ability even among Shinigami. So, Naruto prompted, care to explain why half the captains looked at you like you're a traitor and the other half like they're afraid to acknowledge you? Yoruichi gazed out over the lake, her expression growing distant. A century ago, a close friend of mine, Kazuki Urahara, captain of the 12th Division, was framed for dangerous experimentation on fellow Shinigami. I helped him and the victims escape, knowing it would make me an exile as well. You gave up everything for your friends, Naruto said softly, understanding immediately. Where I'm from, we call that the will of fire. Yoruichi's expression softened. We called it loyalty, something the Gote 13 claims to value but often sacrifices for rules and tradition. She turned to face him fully. Which is why your arrival could change everything. You exist outside their system, potentially above it. I don't want to rule anything, Naruto protested. I just want to understand what I'm becoming and find my place in all this. Sometimes the most reluctant leaders are the ones most needed, Yoruichi replied. But that's a conversation for another time. Right now, we need to prepare you for tomorrow's assessment. Her emphasis made clear her skepticism about the term. You think it's going to be more than just questions and demonstrations. I think certain captains will push to test your limits in combat. Yoruichi's expression grew serious, particularly Zaraki, the one with the eye patch. He lives for fighting powerful opponents. And Kuritsuchi of the 12th Division would love nothing more than to dissect something new and unique. Naruto's hand moved unconsciously to Kujimayo. Let them try. Confidence is good, Yoruichi acknowledged. But remember, these captains have centuries of experience. Yamamoto himself has led the Gote 13 for over 1,000 years. Don't underestimate them. She stood, stretching like the cat she sometimes became. I should go before the patrols change. Remember what we practiced, and trust your instincts, both the human ones that got you this far and the new ones awakening within you. With that advice, she transformed again and leapt from the porch, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Left alone, Naruto drew Kujimayo, laying the black blade across his lap in meditation as Yoruichi had taught him. The Zanpakuto hummed with energy, resonating with his own spiritual pressure. What do you think? He asked aloud. Are we ready for whatever tomorrow brings? We are as ready as we can be, came the sword's reply in his mind. But remember, full sync. Ronization remains elusive because you still resist part of your nature. Not resist, Naruto argued. Just, proceeding carefully. The distinction matters little when power is needed urgently, Kujimayo countered. To achieve Bankai, to access the full extent of our shared power, you must accept all aspects of what you are becoming. Naruto sighed, sheathing the blade. One step at a time. Let's get through tomorrow first. As night fell fully over the Seraite, he gazed up at the moon, wondering if the friends he'd left behind in life ever looked at the same sky and remembered him. The thought brought both comfort and melancholy. Whatever trials awaited him in this afterlife, he would face them with the same determination that had carried him through life. God or not, he remained Naruto Uzumaki at his core, and that, perhaps, was what mattered most. Dawn broke over the Seraite, painting the white stone buildings in soft gold light. Naruto had risen early, spending the quiet hours meditating with Kajmayo, strengthening their connection in preparation for the day ahead. A gentle knock at the door announced Captain Yukitaki's arrival. "I hope you rested well," he said in greeting, his manner as courteous as the day before. "The assessment will take place at the 1st Division training grounds. Several captains have expressed interest in observing." "I'll bet they have," Naruto replied with a wry smile, falling into step beside the white-haired captain. As they walked through the Seraite, Yukitaki offered information about the structures they passed, the history of Soul Society, and the organization of the Gote 13. Unlike many others, he seemed genuinely interested in making Naruto feel welcome rather than contained. "May I ask a personal question?" Yukitaki ventured after a pause in conversation. "Seems fair, considering I'll be fielding plenty today. In your previous life, before you met the Shinigami King, what kind of person were you?" The question caught Naruto off guard. Most in Soul Society seemed concerned only with what he was now, not who he had been. "I was a shinobi, a ninja from a village called Konoha," he began, memories flowing more clearly than they had since his arrival. "When I was born, a nine-tailed fox demon was sealed inside me. Growing up, people feared and avoided me because of it. But I was determined to earn their respect, to become Hokage, the leader and protector of my village." Yukitaki listened attentively, his expression thoughtful. "Eventually, I did become Hokage," Naruto continued, though not for long. "A war broke out, and in the final battle, I sacrificed myself to save everyone." A sad smile crossed his face. "Not the longest tenure as a village leader, but at least I went out protecting what mattered." "A leader who sacrifices for his people," Yukitaki mused. "That aligns with the oldest legends of the Shinigami King, that he was once a mortal who gave everything to establish the balance between worlds." Before Naruto could process this revelation, they arrived at the 1st Division training grounds, an expansive open area surrounded by high walls. Already present were several captains, including Yamamoto, Soifon, the aggressive Zaraki, and others Naruto had seen but not been introduced to. Surprisingly, Yoruichi was also present, standing apart from the others. She acknowledged Naruto with a subtle nod. "We will begin with basic demonstrations," Yamamoto announced once Naruto took his position in the center of the grounds. "Captain Yukitaki will direct the assessment." Yukitaki stepped forward. "Let's start simply. Please demonstrate your control over spiritual pressure." Naruto nodded, centering himself as Yoruichi had taught him. He began to release his spiritual pressure gradually, the air around I am darkening as if actual shadows were being drawn from the surroundings. The pressure increased steadily, not crushing or aggressive like some captains, power, but deep and encompassing, like the inevitability of dusk falling over the world. Several of the observing Shinigami shifted uncomfortably as the spiritual pressure continued to rise. It felt fundamentally different from typical Shinigami energy, older, more primordial. "Sufficient," Yukitaki called, and Naruto reigned in the power. "Now, I understand you've developed a variation on Flash Step." For the next hour, Naruto demonstrated various abilities, his Shadow Step technique, basic Kido, spiritual way, spells Yoruichi had taught him, and controlled manipulation of death energy that allowed him to accelerate or slow the decay of matter with a touch. Throughout the demonstrations, he noticed the captains conferring among themselves, their expressions ranging from skeptical to deeply disturbed. Only Yamamoto's face remained impassive, his ancient eyes missing nothing. Finally, Yukitaki said, "We should assess your combat capabilities with your Zanpakuto. Would you release your Shikai?" Naruto drew Kajmayo, the black blade gleaming dully in the morning light. "Pierce the veil between worlds, Kajmayo." The transformation was immediate, the blade elongating and curving, etched runes appearing along its length. The spiritual pressure in the area doubled as shadows stretched toward Naruto from every direction. A tall captain with a straw hat whistled softly. That's some release. The name translates to shadow life, doesn't it? Or shadow death, corrected another captain, this one wearing a scientist's face paint beneath his white haori. Depending on the kanji interpretation. Fascinating duality. Enough observation, came a rough voice from the side. Captain Zaraki stepped forward, hand on his own Zanpakuto. Let's see what he can do against a real opponent. Yamamoto considered for a moment, then nodded. Lee, mighted engagement may provide valuable insight. Captain Zaraki, you may proceed, with restraint. The massive captain grinned ferally. No promises. In one fluid motion, he drew his battered-looking sword and charged. Naruto barely had time to raise Kajmayo before Zaraki's blade crashed against it, the impact sending shockwaves across the training ground. The force behind the blow was staggering, raw, unrefined power channeled through determined bloodlust. Not bad, Zaraki growled, pressing harder. Most would have been cut in half by now. Naruto didn't respond verbally. Instead, he melted into shadow. Zaraki's blade passing through empty air as Naruto reformed behind him, Kajmayo already in motion. The captain spun with surprising speed for his size, meeting Naruto's attack with his own blade. Sparks flew as black metal met weathered steel. Interesting trick, Zaraki commented, genuine excitement in his voice. But you'll need more than parlor games to handle this. His spiritual pressure exploded outward. Yellow energy surrounding him like flames. The sheer force pushed Naruto back several steps. From the sidelines, Yoruichi watched with narrowed eyes. This was escalating faster than anticipated. Zaraki was notorious for losing himself in battle, restraint forgotten in the thrill of combat. Naruto felt Kajmayo pulse in his hand. He seeks only battle. Show him what true power feels like. Drawing on more of his emerging abilities, Naruto allowed the Shinigami aspect of himself to surface. His spiritual pressure deepened, the air around him growing cold enough that frost formed on the ground at his feet. When he spoke, his voice carried dual tones, his own and something older, more resonant. Enough games, Captain Zaraki. Naruto raised Kajmayo, channeling energy into the blade until it glowed with dark light. With a single downward slash, he released a wave of shadow energy that collided with Zaraki's yellow aura. The resulting explosion rocked the training ground, dust and debris flying outward. When it cleared, Zaraki stood with his uniform torn, a thin line of blood across his chest where the shadow energy had penetrated his defenses. Rather than being angered, the captain looked delighted. Now we're talking, he roared, charging again with even greater ferocity. The battle intensified, Naruto matching Zaraki's raw power with increasingly sophisticated techniques. He began incorporating elements of his shinobi training, shadow clones formed from actual shadows, tactical repositioning, and unpredictable attack patterns that kept the battle-loving captain on his toes. As the fight continued, Naruto felt something shifting within him, the barrier between his human consciousness and the Shinigami power thinning. Knowledge of combat techniques he'd never learned flowed through him, along with an awareness of Zaraki's soul itself, its strength, its scars, its indomitable nature. Captain Zaraki, that is sufficient, Yamamoto's voice cut through the clash of blades. This was to be an assessment, not a death match. Zaraki paused, breathing heavily, his face split in a manic grin. Just getting interesting, old man. Stand down, Yamamoto repeated, his tone allowing no argument. Reluctantly, Zaraki lowered his weapon. We'll finish this another time, Death God, he promised, eyeing Naruto with newfound respect before stepping back to join the other captains. Naruto released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, allowing Kajmayo to return to its sealed form. The rush of battle had awakened something in him, a deeper connection to his power, yes. But also memories from his previous life as a shinobi. Fighting had always clarified things for him, and this was no exception. Yukitake approached, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. That was enlightening. Are you injured? I'm fine, Naruto assured him, though his body ached from the clash with Zaraki's overwhelming power. The captains gathered around Yamamoto, speaking in low voices. Naruto could sense the division among them, some clearly viewing him as a threat to be contained, others as a potential ally, and a few simply as an intriguing anomaly. Yoruichi appeared at his side. You held your own against a captain who lives for battle. Impressive. He wasn't fighting at full strength, Naruto observed. Neither were you, she countered with a knowing smile. Before they could continue their conversation, a messenger appeared beside Yamamoto, kneeling to deliver information in hurried whispers. The head captain's expression darkened. Assessment suspended, he announced. We have reports of multiple high-level hollow incursions in the living world, coordinated attacks targeting spiritually significant locations. The captains immediately tensed, all previous discussions forgotten in the face of duty. Captains, return to your divisions and prepare response teams, Yamamoto ordered. This is not a random occurrence. Something or someone is coordinating these attacks. As the captains dispersed, Yukitake turned to Naruto. I'm afraid I must attend to this. Please return to your quarters until the situation is resolved. Naruto frowned. I can help. Fighting hollows is something I've already done successfully. This is Gote 13 business, Soifan interjected coldly as she passed. Your assistance is neither required nor requested. Once the captains had departed, Yoruichi's expression turned serious. This isn't normal. Coordinated hollow attacks across multiple sites suggests intelligence and purpose. You don't think it's coincidence that this happens right as they're assessing me? Naruto asked. In my experience, there are very few coincidences in Soul Society. Yoruichi glanced toward the direction the captains had gone. Something is happening, and I intend to find out what. Return to your quarters as instructed. It will keep suspicion off you while I investigate. With a quick transformation into her cat form, Yoruichi bounded away, leaving Naruto standing alone in the training ground. They fear what they do not understand, Kujimayo observed in his mind. But soon, they may have greater fears to occupy them. What do you mean? Naruto asked aloud. The balance shifts. As the new Shinigami emerges, those who would exploit the transition make their move. This is only the beginning. With that cryptic warning echoing in his thoughts, Naruto made his way back toward the 13th Division compound, unsettled by the timing of these attacks and increasingly certain that his presence in Soul Society was not mere chance, part of something larger unfolding across the worlds of the living and the dead. Hours passed with no word from either Yoruichi or the Gote 13 captains. Night fell over the Seraite, an uneasy quiet settling over the usually bustling spiritual city. From his quarters, Naruto could sense distant flares of spiritual pressure as squads moved between Soul Society and the living world, responding to what appeared to be an ongoing crisis. Unable to remain idle, he sat cross-legged on the floor, Kujimayo unsheathed across his lap, and entered a meditative state Yoruichi had taught him. In this state, he could extend his awareness beyond physical boundaries, sensing the flow of souls across the realms. What he found disturbed him deeply. The normal patterns were disrupted. Souls that should have been transitioning smoothly between life, death, and rebirth were being intercepted, diverted, consumed. Hollows were merely the symptom of a deeper disorder. You sense it now, Kujimayo's voice resonated in his mind. The violation of the natural order. This is why the Shinigami King's power seeks a new vessel. The old guard falters, a new guardian must rise. Something is feeding on the transition points, Naruto observed. His consciousness expanded beyond normal perception, consuming souls before they can complete their journey. Yes, an ancient hunger awakens, one that once threatened to devour all worlds before the first Shinigami King established the balance. Before Naruto could process this revelation, a familiar spiritual pressure approached rapidly, Yoruichi returning, and in obvious haste. He opened his eyes just as she slipped through his window in human form, her expression grim. We have trouble, she announced without preamble. The hollow attacks were coordinated, but not by any normal hollow evolution. Something is controlling them from the shadows, literally. Naruto stood, sheathing Kujimayo. I sensed disruptions in the flow of souls. Something feeding on the transition points. Yoruichi's eyes widened slightly. You can sense that. Even the most skilled captains can only detect disruptions in their immediate vicinity. She shook her head, refocusing. The captains are spread thin, responding to attacks across multiple sites. But they're missing the real threat. Which is, An entity has appeared in the lowest level of Rukongai, the 80th district. It's absorbing the spirits there, growing stronger. The few reports coming back describe it as a walking shadow, with a bone-white mask. Naruto felt Kujimayo stir at his hip. An advanced hollow. Something older, I think. The descriptions match ancient accounts of the Void Walkers, entities that predated the current balance between worlds, that fed on the essence of souls themselves. Yoruichi's expression was deadly serious. Entities the first Shinigami king supposedly banished from this realm. The implications were clear, and with the transition of power, the barriers weaken. Yoruichi nodded. The Gote 13 doesn't know yet. They're too focused on the symptoms rather than the cause. By the time they realize, it may be too late. Naruto moved toward the door. Then we go. Now. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Yoruichi replied with a grim smile. But know this, if we're right about what this is, we're facing something beyond even captain-level threats. Something that existed before the current order of things. Then it's a good thing I'm becoming something beyond the current order too. Naruto's expression hardened with determination. I didn't ask for this power, but if it can stop whatever's threatening these souls, then I'll use every bit of it. They slipped out of the Seraite using Yoruichi's knowledge of secret passages and patrol schedules, moving swiftly toward the outermost districts of Rukongai. As they traveled, Naruto could feel the disturbance growing stronger, a wound in the fabric of Soul Society itself, leaking spiritual energy into something that should not exist. The 80th district was Rukongai at its most desperate, a lawless slum where souls struggled merely to exist. Now, it was worse than abandoned, it was empty. Buildings stood vacant, possessions scattered as if their owners had fled in terror, or been consumed where they stood. At the district's center, where a dilapidated marketplace once bustled with activity, they found it. The entity towered 3 stories high, a shifting mass of darkness deeper than any natural shadow. Its form was vaguely humanoid but constantly changing, tendrils of blackness reaching out to absorb stray spiritual particles. The only fixed feature was its face, a bone-white mask with hollow eye sockets from which poured an oily darkness. Void Walker, Yoruichi whispered, her usual confidence momentarily shaken. Just like the ancient texts described. The creature turned at the sound of her voice, those empty sockets fixing on them with palpable hunger. At last, it spoke, not aloud but directly into their minds. The voice ancient and cold as the space between stars. The new vessel approaches, unfinished, vulnerable, perfect. What is it talking about? Naruto asked, hand moving to Kujimayo's hilt. You, Yoruichi replied grimly. It senses the Shinigami King's power in transition. It wants to consume it, and you, before the transfer completes. The balance falters, the Void Walker continued, drifting closer. The old king fades. The new king uncrowned. The Void returns to claim what was denied us. Naruto drew Kujimayo, the black blade seeming to drink in what little light remained in the abandoned district. Not if I have anything to say about it. Yoruichi moved into a fighting stance beside him, her hands beginning to glow with concentrated spiritual pressure. Don't underestimate it. These things existed before the laws of Soul Society were established. So did the power I'm inheriting, Naruto countered, raising his Zanpakuto. Pierce the veil between worlds, Kujimayo. As his blade transformed, Naruto felt the connection with his Zanpakuto strengthen, the boundary between them thinning further. This creature, this Void Walker, represented exactly the kind of threat the Shinigami King's power was meant to counter. You understand now, Kujimayo's voice resonated in his mind. This is why you were chosen. Why we must become one. Together. Then, Naruto whispered, fully bracing the connection for the first time. Power surged through him, black energy spiraling around his form. The runes on Kujimayo's blade ignited with silver fire, and shadows from across the district rushed toward him. Drawn by his spiritual pressure. The Void Walker paused, its masked face tilting in what might have been caution or curiosity. Interesting. The vessel learns quickly, but still too new, too human to wield the full power. With frightening speed, the creature attacked, tendrils of darkness lashing out like whips toward both Naruto and Yoruichi. They split apart, evading the initial assault. Yoruichi flash stepped around the creature's flank, her hands striking key points with precision, each blow releasing concentrated spiritual energy into the Void Walker's form. The creature roared in silent pain, more felt than heard, and turned its attention to her, giving Naruto an opening to attack its exposed back. Kujimayo sliced through the darkness, the blade leaving a trail of silver light where it cut. For a moment, it seemed effective, the creature's form destabilized where the blade had passed. But the wound sealed almost instantly, darkness flowing like liquid to repair the damage. Foolish vessel, the Void Walker mocked. Your predecessor knew that conventional attacks cannot harm us. Only the final release of the Death God's power can banish the void. Final release. Naruto called to Yoruichi as they regrouped, the creature advancing slowly now, seemingly enjoying their predicament. Bankai, she confirmed, breathing heavily from her own attacks. But not just an. Why Bankai? The true form of the Shinigami King's power. Something beyond what even captains can achieve. The Void Walker surged forward suddenly, darkness engulfing the space between them. Naruto grabbed Yoruichi and used his shadow step to reposition them on a nearby rooftop, but the creature's awareness followed them effortlessly. Nowhere to hide from the void. We existed before light, before form, before time. Your fledgling powers are nothing. Tendrils of darkness shot upward, shattering the building beneath them. As they leapt clear, one tendril caught Yoruichi midair, wrapping around her ankle. Yoruichi, Naruto shouted, watching in horror as the darkness began to spread up her leg, her spiritual energy visibly draining where it touched. Don't worry about me, she called back, her hands glowing with intense light as she fought against the spreading darkness. Focus on achieving Bankai, it's our only chance. The Void Walker pulled her toward its central mass, other tendrils rising to ensnare her completely. The Shihōin princess first, then the false king. All will return to the void. Something snapped inside Naruto at the sight of Yoruichi in danger. All his hesitation embracing the Shinigami's power vanished, replaced by a single, burning determination. He would not lose someone else he cared about, not in this life or the next. Landing on what remained of a stone wall, Naruto held Kujimayo before him. Blade pointed downward. Kujimayo, he spoke, not loudly but with absolute clarity. I'm ready to accept everything. What I was, what I am, what I'm becoming. No more resistance. The Zanpakuto pulsed in his hands, the runes along its blade flaring brighter. At last, the sword's voice resonated, not just in his mind now but in the air around him. Speak my true name, Naruto Uzumaki, and claim your inheritance. Knowledge flowed into him, not foreign or imposed, but as if remembering something long forgotten. The true nature of death not as an end, but as a transition. The role of the Shinigami King not as a ruler, but as a guardian of that transition. Naruto raised Kujimayo skyward, black energy swirling around him in a vortex that reached toward the heavens. Bankai. The world seemed to hold its breath. Kage no Shinigami, Shadow God. The transformation was immediate and absolute. Kujimayo dissolved into pure darkness that flowed over Naruto's body like living armor. His form grew slightly taller, more imposing, shrouded in shadows that moved with purpose and intelligence. The black kimono he wore transformed into flowing robes reminiscent of the Shinigami King's attire, but with distinctive orange patterns glowing along the edges like molten sunlight. Most striking was the change to his face, not hidden behind a mask as the traditional Shinigami, but marked with glowing sigils that traced down from his eyes like luminous tears. His eyes themselves had transformed, the blue replaced by orbs of deep purple light with black pupils shaped like spiral galaxies. In his right hand formed a new weapon, no longer a katana but a scythe with a black handle wrapped in orange cord, its curved blade made of what appeared to be compressed darkness given edge and purpose. The Void Walker paused in its assault on Yoruichi, those empty eye sockets fixed on Naruto's transformed state. The king rises, it acknowledged, a note of wariness entering its mental voice. But still new, still learning. Naruto's voice, when he spoke, carried the same dual tone as before, but deeper, more resonant, as if speaking from the bottom of eternity. Release her. A single flash step, faster than any he'd performed before, brought him directly before the Void Walker. The scythe swept in an arc too quick to follow, severing the tendrils holding Yoruichi. Unlike his previous attacks, this time the darkness did not reform. the cut edges smoked and withered, unable to regenerate. The Void Walker shrieked, a sound that existed only in their minds but was no less piercing for its silence. Impossible. The vessel cannot master the power so quickly. You're right, Naruto agreed, catching Yoruichi as she fell and setting her gently aside before facing the creature again. I haven't mastered it. I've barely begun. But even this fraction is enough to send you back to the void you came from. The creature attacked in earnest now, all pretense of toying with them abandoned. Dozens of tendrils lashed out from every direction, the entire mass of darkness surging forward to engulf Naruto. He moved through the assault like water flowing around stones, the shadows of his Bankai form allowing him to phase through some attacks while deflecting others with precise swings of his scythe. Each cut left wounds in the creature's form that refused to heal, slowly diminishing its mass. You cannot destroy the void, it insisted, though with less confidence than before. We are eternal. We will return. I'm not destroying you, Naruto corrected, continuing his methodical dismantling of the creature. I'm guiding you back to where you belong. That's the true purpose of the Shinigami, not to end existence, but to maintain the proper flow of all things. With each swing of his scythe, Naruto's understanding of his new role deepened. Death was not obliteration but transition. The Shinigami's duty was to ensure that transition occurred properly, that souls followed their natural course without being diverted or consumed. The Void Walker, sensing its defeat, attempted one final, desperate attack, contracting its entire form into a spear of pure darkness aimed directly at Naruto's heart. If we cannot have this realm, neither shall you, false king. Naruto stood his ground, raising one hand palm outward while bringing his scythe back with the other. Shinigami art. Path of souls. Between his outstretched fingers appeared a small sphere of white light, deceptively tiny given the power it contained. As the Void Walker's attack connected with it, the sphere expanded, creating a gateway that began to draw in the creature's darkness. No, not the path. Not again. Return to the void, Naruto commanded, his voice carrying the authority of his office. When the time comes for even shadows to transition, I will guide you, but that time is not now. With a final swing of his scythe, he cleaved through what remained of the creature's form, driving it completely into the gateway. The bone-white mask was the last to disappear, those empty sockets somehow conveying hatred and fear as they were drawn into the light. We will return, Shinigami King. When the balance falters again, the void awaits. The gateway closed with a soft pulse of energy, leaving behind nothing but fading echoes of the creature's final threat. Naruto's Bankai form remained active as he turned to Yoruichi, who was watching him with an expression of awe rarely seen on her confident face. Are you all right? He asked, kneeling beside her. The darkness where the Void Walker had touched her was receding, her natural spiritual energy reasserting itself. I've been better, she admitted, sitting up with a wince. But I'll recover. Her golden eyes studied his transformed appearance with fascination. So this is what the Shinigami King truly looks like. What I truly look like, Naruto corrected gently. Or at least, what I'm becoming. He gazed at his hand, shadow and light playing across his palm. It's strange. I feel both more and less than I was before. Older and younger simultaneously. Yoruichi reached out hesitantly, then placed her hand against his cheek. You're still you. I can see Naruto Uzumaki behind those cosmic eyes. The simple touch grounded him, drawing him back from the vastness that threatened to overwhelm his human consciousness. We should go, she continued, gesturing around them. The Gote 13 will have sensed that display of power. They'll be coming to investigate. As if summoned by her words, they felt the approaching spiritual pressures of multiple captains, moving rapidly toward their location. Naruto's Bankai form dissolved, the scythe returning to Kajmayo's sealed katana state, the shadow armor receding to reveal his normal appearance, though his eyes retained a faint purple glow that faded slowly. Let them come, he said, helping Yoruichi to her feet. It's time they understood what we're really facing, and why I'm here. As the first captains appeared on the horizon, Flash stepping toward the scene of battle, Naruto stood tall beside Yoruichi, Kajmayo sheathed but ready at his side. The role he'd been hesitant to accept now felt right, not a burden imposed, but a responsibility he was uniquely suited to bear. The true test, however, was just beginning. For as the Void Walker had warned, there were more threats waiting beyond the veil. And the balance between worlds remained precarious during this transition of power. But for the first time since arriving in Soul Society, Naruto felt certain of his path forward, not just as the reluctant inheritor of divine power, but as the guardian the realms needed in the face of ancient shadows stirring once more. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Between Two Worlds. The captains of the Gote 13s stood in a semicircle around Naruto and Yoruichi, their expressions ranging from open hostility to cautious respect. The devastated landscape of the 80th district spread around them, buildings reduced to rubble. Streets cratered with impact marks, the very air still heavy with spiritual residue. Captain Yukitake was the first to approach, his white hair stirring in the spiritual aftershocks. "What happened here?" he asked, his tone more concerned than accusatory. "A Void Walker," Yoruichi answered before Naruto could speak. "An entity from before the current order, drawn by the transition of the Shinigami King's power." Murmurs rippled through the assembled captains. Captain Kiraku, the laid-back commander with the straw hat, stepped forward, his normally relaxed demeanor replaced by serious focus. "Void Walkers are myths from the founding era," he said, though his skeptical words were belied by the careful way his eyes scanned the battlefield. "Stories to frighten academy students. I assure you," Naruto replied, still feeling the residual energy of his Bankai coursing through him. "What we fought was very real." Head Captain Yamamoto's spiritual pressure intensified as he moved to the center of the group, his ancient eyes taking in the scene with a piercing gaze that seemed to cut through pretense. "You achieved Bankai," he stated, not a question but an observation. "A feat that takes most Shinigami decades. If they achieve it at all." Naruto nodded, seeing no point in denial. "The circumstances were unique. As is everything about you, it seems," Yamamoto replied. His weathered hand tightened around his staff, which Naruto now recognized as his disguised Zanpakuto. "You left your assigned quarters against explicit instructions, entered Rukongai without authorization, and engaged an enemy without coordinating with the Gote 13. With respect, Head Captain," Yoruichi interjected, "there wasn't time for bureaucracy. The Void Walker was consuming souls by the hundreds, and your forces were occupied with the diversionary attacks in the living world." "Diversionary?" Captain Hitsugaya's sharp voice cut in. "You claim the coordinated hollow attacks were merely a distraction, orchestrated to spread your forces thin while the real threat manifested here," Naruto confirmed. "The Void Walker made that clear during our confrontation." Captain Soi Fon's eyes narrowed, her gaze fixed on Yoruichi rather than Naruto, and were expected to accept this account without question. "From an exile and an unknown entity claiming godhood." "Soi Fon," Yoruichi began, a hint of weariness in her voice. Captain Soi Fon, the smaller woman corrected sharply. "Your familiar address is inappropriate, Lady Shihōin." Yamamoto tapped his staff once, silencing the brewing conflict. Regardless of the nature of the threat, the fact remains that significant power was unleashed here without Gote 13 sanction. His gaze settled on Naruto. "Power that confirms you are indeed something beyond an ordinary soul." A tense silence fell over the group. Naruto could sense the captains' divided opinions, some seeing him as a potential ally against whatever had orchestrated these attacks, others viewing him as a threat to the established order, perhaps even the cause of the disturbances. "I propose a compromise," Captain Yukitake said, stepping into the silence. Naruto Uzumaki has demonstrated both considerable power and the will to protect Soul Society from threats. Rather than confining him, let us work with him to understand what's happening and prepare for what may come next. "I agree," Captain Kiraku added, adjusting his hat. "Old Yama, you've always said we should keep potential problems where we can see them. What better way than incorporating our mysterious friend into our response efforts?" Yamamoto considered this for a long moment, his ancient eyes never leaving Naruto's face. "You will remain within the Seraite," he finally declared, but with greater freedom of movement. "You will train with appointed captains to better control your abilities and assist in investigating these disturbances." His gaze shifted to Yoruichi. "As for you, Yoruichi Shihōin, your status remains complicated. However, your knowledge of these ancient threats appears valuable. You may remain as an advisor, though not officially reinstated." "How generous," Yoruichi replied. a hint of irony in her tone that didn't go unnoticed. Don't mistake pragmatism for generosity, Yamamoto countered. The Gote 13 exists to maintain balance. If that balance is threatened as you claim, we will utilize all available resources, even unconventional ones. He turned to address the other captains. Return to your divisions and conduct thorough assessments of the hollow attacks. Look for patterns, anomalies, anything that might confirm or refute the theory that they were coordinated diversions. As the captains began to disperse, Yamamoto added, Captain Yukitake, you will continue as liaison to our guest. Captain Kyoraku, assemble the historical records regarding these Void Walkers and the transition of the Shinigami King's power. We must separate fact from legend. With a final meaningful look at Naruto, the head captain departed, leaving Yukitake, Kyoraku, and Soi Fon behind with Naruto and Yoruichi. Soi Fon's cold gaze lingered on Yoruichi. This changes nothing between us, she stated flatly before stepping away, her departure leaving a palpable tension in the air. Kyoraku sighed, his casual demeanor returning. Always so intense, that one. He turned to Naruto with a half smile. So, the new Shinigami King, I bet you have some interesting stories to tell over sake sometime. Shunsui, Yukitake admonished gently, this isn't the time. It's never the time, according to you. Kyoraku replied good-naturedly, but fine, I'll save my questions for when we're all not standing in a demolished district. He tipped his hat to Yoruichi. Good to see you again, Yoruichi. The Seraite has been much less interesting without you. After he departed, Yukitake approached Naruto and Yoruichi with a concerned expression. Are either of you injured? That entity must have been formidable. Nothing that won't heal, Yoruichi assured him, though Naruto noted she favored her right leg where the Void Walker had grabbed her. I'm fine, Naruto added, though. Fine. Didn't quite capture the transformation he felt inside. Since activating Bankai, the integration of his consciousness with the Shinigami King's power had accelerated. Memories that weren't his own continued to surface. Ancient conflicts, the establishment of Soul Society's order, the original binding of the Void Walkers. Yukitake studied him thoughtfully. Your spiritual pressure has changed. More settled, somehow. Less turbulent than before. Naruto nodded, unable to articulate fully how different he felt. Achieving Bankai clarified things. I imagine it would, Yukitake replied with genuine interest. Most Shinigami describe their first Bankai as a transformative experience, a deeper communion with the essence of their power. For you, with what you're becoming. He trailed off, then shook his head. But such discussions can wait. For now, let's return to the Seraite. You'll both need rest, and tomorrow promises to be eventful. As they made their way back, Naruto walked beside Yoruichi, noting the careful way she moved despite her attempts to hide her discomfort. The Void Walker's touch affected you more than you're letting on, he observed quietly. Yoruichi's golden eyes flicked to him, a hint of surprise in them before she masked it. Perceptive. Yes, whatever that thing was, its darkness lingers. But I'll recover. Let me help, Naruto offered, reaching for her arm. She hesitated, then allowed the contact. Naruto concentrated, drawing on his newly clarified understanding of his powers. His fingers glowed with soft silver light as he traced the path. Where the Void Walker's darkness had touched her. The lingering shadows retreated from his touch, dissolving into harmless spiritual particles. That's remarkably effective, Yoruichi admitted, flexing her leg experimentally. Where did you learn that technique? I didn't, Naruto replied, slightly unsettled by the instinctive knowledge. Or rather, I did, but in another lifetime. The memories are still fragmentary. But certain skills seem to surface when needed. Yoruichi studied him with newfound curiosity. The merging is happening faster than I expected. Are you still, you? The question echoed his own concerns. But Naruto found himself smiling reassuringly. Still me. Just more. Like having access to another lifetime of experience without losing my own identity. He paused, considering. It's not replacement, but integration. Yoruichi seemed satisfied with this answer, though Naruto caught Yukitake watching their exchange with thoughtful interest. The return to the Seraite was markedly different from their earlier covert departure. This time, They entered openly through the main gate, escorted by a captain of the Gote 13. Shinigami stopped to stare as they passed. Word of the battle in the 80th district having spread rapidly through Soul Society's efficient rumor mill. Your quarters have been relocated, Yukatake informed them as they approached the 13th Division compound. Given your new status, the head captain thought something more suitable was in order. He led them to a spacious building near the heart of the Seraite, situated between the division. To symbolize Naruto's unique position, neither fully integrated into the Gote 13 hierarchy nor separate from it. The Shihōin estate is nearby, Yukatake added, glancing at Yoruichi. Though I understand if you prefer not to return there given the circumstances of your departure. Yoruichi's expression remained carefully neutral. This arrangement will suffice for now. After Yukatake left them with promises to return in the morning, Naruto explored the new accommodations. The building was traditionally designed but luxuriously appointed, with separate sleeping chambers, a meditation room, and a private garden enclosed by high walls. They're keeping us comfortable while keeping us contained, Yoruichi observed, sliding open a screen to reveal the garden. Classic Soul Society tactics. It really containment if we can leave whenever we choose? Naruto asked, joining her at the doorway. It's about creating the illusion of cooperation while maintaining surveillance, she replied, steering subtly toward certain points around the property. There are at least 6 monitoring devices hidden in the garden alone. Probably more inside that I haven't spotted yet. Naruto raised an eyebrow. You're very familiar with their methods. I helped design some of them during my time as Onmitsukido commander, she admitted with a hint of irony. Though these are newer models. She stepped into the garden, stretching like the cat she sometimes became. We should assume everything we say is being monitored, though they'll maintain the pretense of privacy. Then we should give them something worth hearing. Naruto replied with a mischievous grin reminiscent of his younger self. Raising his voice slightly, he continued, I, for one, am grateful for such generous accommodations. The Gote 13's hospitality is truly remarkable. Yoruichi's lips quirked in amusement. Indeed, their commitment to understanding new allies rather than alienating them shows great wisdom. Their staged conversation continued as they moved through the garden, expertly walking the line between sincere appreciation and subtle mockery that only those listening in would detect. It was a small rebellion, but it established a tone for their cooperation with Soul Society's authorities, willing but not subservient. As night fell, they retreated inside, where Yoruichi located and disabled the most intrusive the monitoring devices while leaving enough intact to avoid suspicion. We need to talk strategy, she said, settling across from Naruto at a low table. The appearance of a Void Walker changes everything. If one could breach the barriers between realms, others will follow. Naruto nodded, his expression serious. Kujumayo suggested as much. The transition of the Shinigami King's power has created instabilities. Which means we need to accelerate your training, Yoruichi continued. Your Bankai is powerful, but raw. With refinement, you could potentially seal the breaches these entities are exploiting. There's something else, Naruto added, hesitant to voice the growing certainty he felt. I don't think these incursions are random opportunism. The Void Walker knew me, or rather, it knew what I'm becoming. It targeted me specifically. Yoruichi's golden eyes narrowed in thought. You think something is deliberately interfering with your ascension to the Shinigami King's role? Or someone, Naruto confirmed. These coordinated attacks, the specific targeting of transition points between worlds, it feels like a strategy, not chaos. Which means we're dealing with an intelligent, capable of manipulating hollows and potentially even Void Walkers, Yoruichi concluded. Few entities have that kind of power or knowledge. She rose and began pacing, her movements betraying her agitation. There are legends of beings who opposed the original establishment of balance between worlds, who preferred the chaos of the primordial state where the boundaries between life, death, and the void were permeable. The Hollow King, Naruto said, the name rising from the ancient memories now accessible to him. Yoruichi stopped pacing, her eyes widening slightly. How do you know that name? The same way I knew how to purify the darkness in your leg, Naruto replied. It's in the memories I'm inheriting. The Hollow King was the first and most powerful of the Hollows, an entity that exists before the distinction between plus and hollow was formalized. The original Shinigami King sealed him away at the foundation of Soul Society. And if the Shinigami King's power is in transition, Yoruichi didn't need to finish the thought. The seal weakens, Naruto confirmed grimly. The Void Walkers are just the beginning, harbingers of his return. Yoruichi sat back down, absorbing this revelation. The Gote 13 needs to know this. Even Yamamoto may not fully understand what we're facing. Will they believe us? Naruto asked. Soi Fan made it clear that trust is in short supply. AAC. Complicated expression crossed Yoruichi's face at the mention of her former protege. Some will, some won't. But we have to try. She fixed him with a determined gaze. In the meantime, we train. If you're right about the Hollow King, you'll need every fragment of the Shinigami's power fully integrated and controlled. Naruto nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to Kujumayo. The Zanpakuto hummed with energy, resonating with the growing certainty of the conflict to come. Tomorrow, then, he agreed, feeling the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on his shoulders. Not just for Soul Society, but for the balance of all worlds. Dawn found Naruto in the garden, seated in meditation with Kujumayo across his lap. The rising sun painted the traditional landscape in gold and amber, but Naruto's awareness extended far beyond his physical surroundings. With each passing hour, his perception of Soul Society's spiritual fabric grew more acute. He could sense the flow of souls through the different districts of Rukongai. The controlled power of the Shinigami within the Seraite, and, more disturbingly, small flickers of darkness at the boundaries of his awareness. Not full breaches like the Void Walker, but probing tendrils testing the integrity of the barriers between realms. You're getting better at that. Yoruichi's voice brought him back to his immediate surroundings. She stood at the garden's edge, already dressed in her distinctive sleeveless outfit, her purple hair tied back for training. The range extends each time I try, Naruto confirmed, sheathing Kujumayo and rising fluidly to his feet. I can sense almost to the outer districts now. And, Yoruichi prompted, reading his concerned expression. More disturbances, small ones, but growing in frequency. Like Somethi, testing the defenses before a larger assault. Yoruichi nodded, unsurprised but troubled. We should. A knock at the outer door interrupted her. Captain Yukitaki entered a moment later, accompanied by Captain Kiraku, both bearing expressions that mixed seriousness with barely concealed excitement. Good morning, Yukitaki greeted them. I hope we're not interrupting anything important. Just discussing the deteriorating state of the barriers between realms, Yoruichi replied candidly. Nothing urgent. Kiraku chuckled despite the gravity of the subject. Your sense of timing remains impeccable, Yoruichi. He held up an ancient-looking scroll case. We've been in the archives all night, and I think you'll find what we've discovered rather relevant to your concerns. They gathered around the table inside as Kiraku carefully unrolled a scroll so old its edges crumbled at his touch. This dates from the founding era of Soul Society, he explained. One of the original records kept by the first members of the Zero Division, the royal guard who served the Shinigami King directly. The text was written in an archaic form of the spiritual language, but Naruto found he could read it effortlessly, another benefit of his ongoing integration with the Shinigami King's consciousness. In the time before time, he read aloud, when the boundaries between realms were as thin as autumn mist. The Hollow King arose from the chaos, neither fully of the void nor of the material realms. He commanded legions of shadow and bone, seeking to devour all souls and return existence to primordial darkness. Yukitaki nodded encouragingly as Naruto continued. The first balance was established when the Shinigami King, once mortal but ascended through sacrifice, bound the Hollow King beyond the outermost ring of existence. But the binding came at great cost, for the king's power was divided, one part to maintain the seal, one part to guide the flow of souls, and one part to pass to a worthy successor when the cycle of renewal demanded it. Naruto paused, the implications sinking in. The Shinigami King's power was fragmented from the beginning, which explains why your transition is gradual rather than immediate. Kiraku observed, you're receiving the power in stages as the previous king's essence fades. There's more, Yukitaki prompted, pointing further down the scroll. Naruto continued reading, and it was foretold that in the fullness of time, when shadow touches light and the guardian's mantle passes, the ancient enemy shall test his bonds. The void walkers will herald his awakening. Drawn to the power in transition. Should the new guardian falter, all realms will know darkness eternal. The weight of the prophecy settled over the room like a physical presence. Well, Yoruichi broke the silence. At least we know we're not imagining things. This confirms your theory about coordinated attacks, Yukitake said, his expression grave. The head captain needs to see this immediately. He already has, Hiraku replied, carefully rolling the scroll closed. Old Yama doesn't sleep much these days. He's called a full captain's meeting for midday to discuss our response. He fixed Naruto with an unexpectedly serious gaze. Which brings us to the other reason for our visit. The head captain requests your participation in the meeting, not as an observer, but as a central figure in this emerging crisis. Quote, and me? Yoruichi asked, her tone neutral but her posture tensing slightly. You as well, Yukitake confirmed. Your knowledge of the ancient texts and unconventional perspectives may prove valuable. How diplomatic of you, Yoruichi replied with a hint of her usual mischief, though the gravity of the situation tempered her typical playfulness. And after the meeting, training, Hiraku answered, his casual tone belying the seriousness of his words. Intensive, focused, and without the usual restraints. If Naruto is indeed becoming what these texts describe, then time is our most precious and limited resource. Naruto nodded, determination replacing the momentary weight of destiny. Then let's not waste it. What's the plan? First, the meeting, Yukitake replied. Then, depending on the head captain's decisions, we've arranged for specialized training rotations. Different captains will work with you on specific aspects of your abilities. And me? Yoruichi asked again, more pointedly. Hiraku's expression softened slightly. Your situation remains complicated, Yoruichi. But given the circumstances, the head captain is willing to temporarily set aside old grievances. Your knowledge of Ho-Ho and high-speed combat techniques would be particularly valuable in Naruto's training. Yoruichi nodded, satisfied for the moment. Then we'd better prepare for this meeting. Something tells me not all the captains will be as accepting of the situation as you two. A fair assessment, Yukitake agreed with a rueful smile. Particularly since the revelation of the Shinigami King's successor traditionally falls under Central 46's jurisdiction, not the Gote 13's. Central 46, Naruto questioned. Soul Society's governing body, Yoruichi explained. 40 wise men and 6 judges who dictate the laws of Soul Society from their underground chamber. They rarely involve themselves directly in Gote 13 operations, but something of this magnitude. They'll want control, Naruto concluded, understanding immediately. To contain and direct the Shinigami King's power according to their interpretation of the balance. Precisely. Hiraku confirmed, which is why this meeting is as much political as tactical. The head captain is essentially staking the Gote 13's claim to jurisdiction over your case before Central 46 can intervene. Naruto absorbed this, another layer of complexity in the already tangled web of Soul Society's power structures. And what do you think is the right approach? Yukitake and Hiraku exchanged glances, a silent communication born of centuries of friendship. Central 46 maintains the law, Yukitake answered carefully. The Gote 13 maintains the balance. In times of crisis, those missions can diverge. What Jashiro is too diplomatic to say. Hiraku added with a wry smile, is that Central 46's concern would be controlling your power, while our concern is enabling you to use it effectively against the coming threat. So we're all clear where our interests align, Yoruichi concluded. For now, at least. The unspoken qualification hung in the air. Alliances in Soul Society were rarely permanent, especially when power was at stake. We should prepare, Naruto decided, rising from the table. If this meeting is as important as you suggest, I want to enter it fully informed and ready. As Yukita, Kei and Kiraku departed to make final arrangements, Yoruichi turned to Naruto with a measuring look. You're adapting quickly to Soul Society's politics, she observed. The Naruto I met in Rukongai would have been more direct. Naruto smiled, a flash of his old self showing through. Don't worry, that Naruto's still here. But being Hokage taught me that sometimes you have to navigate politics to protect what matters. His expression grew more serious. And right now, what matters is preparing for whatever's coming through those weakening barriers. Yoruichi nodded, a hint of approval in her golden eyes. Then let's make sure you're ready to impress those captains. We've got a few hours before the meeting, enough time for one more training session. What did you have in mind? Her smile turned predatory, something to remind them why the Shinigami King's successor shouldn't be underestimated. The captain's hall of the 1st Division headquarters fell silent as Naruto and Yoruichi entered. Escorted by Yukitake and Kyoraku. Unlike the informal gathering after the Void Walker incident, this was a formal assembly of Soul Society's military leadership, with all 13 captains ARR. Anged in 2 rows facing the head captain's seat. Naruto had foregone the traditional Shinigami uniform, instead wearing an outfit that combined elements of his shinobi attire with the dignified style. Inappropriate for Soul Society, black hakama pants, an orange and black haori jacket over a fitted black shirt, and kajmayo secured at his waist. The choice was deliberate, visually reinforcing his IQ position, neither fully Shinigami nor separate from their world. Yamamoto's ancient gaze tracked them as they took their positions at the center of the hall. Naruto Uzumaki, Yoruichi Shihōin, you stand before the assembled captains of the Gote 13 in a time of unprecedented crisis. His spiritual pressure filled the room, not threatening but establishing the gravity of the proceedings. The ancient texts have been consulted. The signs have been confirmed. We face the potential awakening of threats sealed away since the founding of Soul Society. Murmurs ran through the assembled captains. Though Naruto noted that several, particularly Yukitake, Kyoraku, and surprisingly, the serious Captain Kuchiki, seemed unsurprised by this declaration. Before we proceed with tactical discussions, Yamamoto continued. There is the matter of your status, Naruto Uzumaki. The evidence increasingly supports your claim regarding the Shinigami King's succession. However, such a transition has not occurred in recorded history, leaving us without precedent for how to proceed. Captain Kuretsuchi, the face-painted leader of the 12th Division, stepped forward. If I may, Head Captain. My division has analyzed the spiritual pressure patterns from both the subject's Bankai release and historical readings taken near the Spirit King's palace. The correlation is undeniable. He is indeed channeling power similar in structure, if not yet in magnitude, to the Shinigami Kings. The question is not whether he possesses this power, interjected Captain Soifon, but how it should be monitored and directed. Such authority cannot be left unregulated, especially in one so inexperienced in Soul Society's traditions. Captain Soifon raises a valid concern, Yamamoto acknowledged. Which is why I have made a decision regarding your position. Naruto Uzumaki. The room tensed, captains shifting subtly as they awaited the head captain's decree. You will be granted the status of special authority within the Gote 13, neither subject to our chain of command nor entirely independent of it. You will work directly with appointed captains to develop your abilities and address the emerging threat, while maintaining the autonomy your unique position requires. Naruto inclined his head respectfully. I appreciate your wisdom, head captain. My goal is to protect the balance between worlds, which aligns with the Gote 13's mission. As for you, Yoruichi Shihōin, Yamamoto continued, your exile is temporarily suspended in light of current circumstances. You will serve as primary combat instructor to Naruto Uzumaki and advisor on matters relating to the ancient threats. Yoruichi bowed slightly, her expression carefully neutral despite this significant concession. Now, Yamamoto said, tapping his staff once, to the matter at hand. Captain Kuretsuchi, report on the barrier breaches. The scientist captain stepped forward again, seemingly eager to share his findings. We have detected 17 micro-breaches in the barriers between realms in the past 24 hours alone, a 300% increase from normal background fluctuations. Most concerning is their pattern. He activated a projection Kido, displaying a map of Soul Society with glowing points marking the breach locations. They form a spiral pattern converging on the center of the Seraite, specifically, on the Lakati. On where our guest here has spent most of his time. All eyes turned briefly to Naruto. These breaches are too small for entities like the Void Walker to pass through, Kuretsuchi continued, but they appear to be expanding incrementally. My analysis suggests they are testing probes, gathering data on our defenses and identifying weak points for a larger incursion. Can they be sealed? Captain Hitsugaya asked, his youthful face belying his tactical sharpness. Temporarily, Kuretsuchi replied with obvious frustration. But new ones appear almost as quickly as we close the existing breaches. Something is applying consistent pressure from the other side. The Hollow King tests his bonds, Naruto said quietly, drawing the attention of every captain. These aren't random breaches, they're systematic attempts to map the barriers the original Shinigami King created. And you know this how? Soi Fan challenged. The same way I knew how to banish the Void Walker, Naruto answered evenly. Knowledge comes with the power I'm inheriting. Captain Komamura, the wolf-headed leader of the 7th Division who had remained silent until now, spoke in his deep, rumbling voice. If what you say is true, then these breaches are merely preludes. What comes next? Naruto exchanged a glance with Yoruichi before answering. If the pattern follows what's described in the ancient texts, the next say will be more focused incursions, entities stronger than ordinary hollows but not yet at the level of the Void Walker. They'll target spiritually significant locations to weaken specific points in the barrier. And the end goal? Yukatake prompted, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. To create a breach large enough for the Hollow King to exploit, Naruto confirmed grimly. Not a full escape from his prison, but enough for him to extend his influence directly into Soul Society and the living world. Silence fell as the captains absorbed the magnitude of this threat. How do we prevent this? Yamamoto asked directly, his ancient eyes fixed on Naruto. 2 approaches, Naruto replied, the strategy forming from the blended knowledge of his shinobi training and the Shinigami King's memories. First, we strengthen the existing barriers. That's something I can help with as my connection to the Shinigami King's power grows stronger. Second, we intercept these NS before they can establish footholds, which means coordinated responses from the Gote 13 when breaches are detected. A reactive strategy, Soi Fan observed disapprovingly. For now, Yoruichi countered. Until Naruto fully integrates the Shinigami King's power, we can't take the offensive against the Hollow King directly. Which brings us to your training, Yamamoto said. Captain Yukatake and Captain Kyoraku have developed a regimen that will involve multiple captains focusing on different aspects of your abilities. Given the accelerating timeline of these incursions, I am authorizing the use of unconventional methods. Kyoraku stepped forward, his usual laid-back demeanor underscored with purpose. We'll be adapting the Tenshintai method for accelerated Bankai training to focus instead on integration and control of your existing Bankai. Additionally, captains with specialized knowledge will work with you on specific aspects of the Shinigami King's historical abilities. The training will be intense, Yukatake added. Possibly dangerous, but necessary given what we face. Naruto nodded, undaunted. When do we begin? Immediately following this meeting, Yamamoto declared. Captains, you have your assignments. Coordinate your efforts through the 1st Division. Dismissed. As the captains began to disperse, Soi Fan approached Yoruichi, her expression tightly controlled. We need to talk, she said. Her tone clipped. Privately, Yoruichi nodded, an unreadable look passing over her features. Of course, she turned to Naruto. I'll meet you at the training grounds. This won't take long. As Yoruichi departed with her former protege, Yukatake and Kyoraku flanked Naruto, guiding him toward the exit. That went better than expected, Kyoraku commented. No one called for your imprisonment or execution, which is practically a warm welcome by Soul Society standards. Shunsui, Yukatake admonished, though without much force. Am I wrong? Kyoraku countered good-naturedly. Last time we had someone with unusual power show up, the Central 46 ordered their immediate arrest. The circumstances are different, Yukatake replied diplomatically. The threat we face changes the calculation. Naruto listened to their banter with half an ear, his attention drawn to the fading spiritual pressures of Yoruichi and Soi Fan. Even at this distance, he could sense the tension between them, old wounds and complex emotions that ran deeper than mere professional disagreement. They have history, he observed as they exited the 1st Division headquarters. Yukatake nodded, unsurprised by Naruto's perception. Yoruichi was captain of the 2nd Division and commander of the Onmitsukido before her departure. Soi Fan was her protege and most loyal subordinate. When Yoruichi left to help her friends, Soi Fan saw it as abandonment. Hiraku continued, unusual seriousness entering his tone. A betrayal of everything she believed in. She's spent the century since trying to surpass her former mentor while simultaneously denying how much that abandonment wounded her. Complicated, Naruto summarized, though the dynamic felt strangely familiar. It reminded him of Sasuke's reaction to perceived betrayals. The mixture of anger and hurt that had driven his former friend for so long. Soul Society specializes in complicated relationships, Hiraku replied with a wry smile. You'll get used to it. They arrived at a secluded training ground behind the 13th Division compound, an area ringed by Kido barriers for privacy and safety. Several other captains were already present, including the intimidating Kenpachi Zaraki and the coldly analytical Mayuri Kuretsuchi. Your first session will focus on Bankai refinement, Yukitake explained. Captain Kiraku and I will guide you through the process, with Captain Kuretsuchi monitoring the spiritual pressure fluctuations to establish baselines for future training. And Zaraki? Naruto asked, eyeing the battle-loving Aptane who seemed to be vibrating with barely contained excitement. Combat application, Hiraku answered with a slight grimace. Once you've established better control, you'll need to test it under combat conditions. Zaraki volunteered, enthusiastically. The massive captain grinned ferally, his hand already resting on his Zanpakuto's hilt. Don't keep me waiting too long. Our last match was just getting interesting before the old man interrupted. Let's begin, Yukitake said, directing Naruto to the center of the training ground. Draw your Zanpakuto and enter a meditative stance. The Saint step is establishing a more conscious link with your Bankai form rather than relying on combat instinct to trigger it. Naruto complied, drawing Kujumayo and kneeling in the center of the space. As he closed his eyes, he could sense the captains forming a circle around him, their spiritual pressures creating a contained field that would both protect the surrounding area and intensify the training effects. Reach for your Bankai, Yukitake instructed, his voice calm and steady. Not to activate it yet, but to feel its shape within your soul. Naruto turned his awareness inward, seeking the core of power that had manifested during his battle with the Void Walker. He found it immediately, no longer distant or resisted, but integrated more fully with his consciousness. The Shinigami King's power and his own spiritual energy had begun to harmonize, creating something unique to him rather than a mere transfer of authority. You understand now, Kujumayo's voice echoed in his mind. What you Biko, me is neither solely what you were nor what the Shinigami King was, but something new, forged from both. I understand, Naruto replied internally. The balance needs a guardian who can adapt, not just maintain. He could feel the captain's spiritual pressures reacting to his meditative communion, adjusting to contain and direct the growing energy that surrounded him. Now, Hiraku's voice penetrated his meditation. Call forth your Bankai, but do so gradually, layer by layer, maintaining awareness of each aspect as it manifests. Naruto drew a deep breath and spoke the release command, but rather than the explosive transformation of his first Bankai, he controlled the process, unfolding each element with deliberate intention. Bankai. Kage no Shinigami. The transformation began at his core and expanded outward. First, Kujumayo dissolved and reformed as the scythe, its curved blade solidifying from shadow into tangible darkness. Then the changes to his appearance followed, the flowing robes with their orange pattern, the glowing sigils that traced down from his eyes, the shift in his spiritual pressure from merely powerful to fundamentally different in nature. Throughout the process, Naruto maintained conscious awareness, noting how each element connected to specific aspects of the Shinigami King's authority, the scythe to the power over the transition between life and death, the robes to the mantle of office, the sigils to the ability to perceive beyond normal spiritual awareness. Remarkable control, Yukitake observed, genuine admiration in his voice. Most Shinigami require years to achieve this level of precision with their Bankai. It helps that I've technically had centuries of practice, Naruto replied, his voice carrying the dual tones of his Bankai state. Just not in this lifetime. Now for the interesting part, Kuretsuchi interjected, approaching with a device that hummed with spiritual energy. Attempt to manipulate specific aspects of your power rather than the full spectrum. For instance, focus solely on the perceptual abilities without the combat applications. Naruto concentrated, directing his will toward the sigils that enhanced his spiritual perception. The marks glowed brighter as he channeled power into them specifically, and suddenly his awareness expanded dramatically. He could perceive not just the training ground and the Seraite, the entirety of soul society, every soul, every spiritual current, every minute disturbance in the fabric of reality. More disturbingly, he could see the breaches Kuretsuchi had identified in the barrier, not as abstract data points, but as actual wounds in the spiritual membrane separating the realms. Through those wounds, he sensed watching presences, patient and calculating. "They're aware of us," he said aloud, his voice distant as his perception stretched beyond normal limits. "The entities on the other side, they're monitoring our preparations." "Fascinating," Kuretsuchi muttered, adjusting his device to capture readings. "He's perceiving across dimensional boundaries." "Naruto," Yukitaki's voice called him back to the immediate present. "Can you identify what's watching? Is it the Hollow King himself?" Naruto focused his enhanced perception on the largest of the breaches, trying to sense what lay beyond. "Not directly. There are intermediaries, servants or extensions of his will. They're assessing Soul Society's defenses, particularly around." He paused, a chill running through him despite the power flowing through his transformed state. "Around what?" Hiraku prompted. "The pathways to the royal realm." Naruto finished, opening his eyes to meet the captain's concerned gazes. "They're not just targeting Soul Society or the living world. They're mapping routes to where the Spirit King resides." This revelation sent a shock through the assembled captains. The Spirit King was the linchpin of existence itself, not to be confused with the Shinigami King, who governed the flow of souls. The Spirit King maintained the very structure of reality across all realms. If the Hollow King seeks to strike at the Spirit King, Yukitaki began, the implications too grave to fully articulate. Then his ambition goes beyond mere escape from his prison, Hiraku finished. He seeks to remake the fundamental order of existence. That aligns with the ancient accounts, came Yoruichi's voice as she stepped into the training ground, her discussion with Soifon apparently concluded. The Hollow King didn't merely want to consume souls, he wanted to erase the boundaries between realms entirely, returning existence to the primordial chaos from which he drew power. She approached Naruto, studying his Bankai form with newfound seriousness. "You've made progress quickly. Good. We'll need every advantage." "What about Soifon?" Naruto asked, noting the subtle tension in Yoruichi's posture despite her composed expression. "She's processing," Yoruichi replied diplomatically. "But she's also a professional. Personal feelings aside, she understands the threat we're facing and will coordinate the Onmitsukido accordingly." A sudden spike in spiritual pressure drew everyone's attention as Zaraki stepped forward, his patience evidently exhausted. "Enough talk about boundaries and kings," he growled, drawing his weathered Zanpakuto. "Let's see what this Bankai can do in a real fight." Yukitaki sighed. "Captain Zaraki, we agreed to progress methodically." "Your method's boring," Zaraki interrupted. "Mine's more direct." Without further warning, he charged at Naruto, spiritual pressure erupting around him like golden flames. Rather than evade, Naruto met the charge head-on, his side intercepting Zaraki's blade with a clash that sent shockwaves across the training ground. Unlike their previous encounter, however, Naruto now maintained perfect control of his transformed state, channeling power with precision rather than raw output. "That's more like it," Zaraki laughed, genuinely delighted as they exchanged blows at speeds that blurred to normal perception. "Show me what a god can do, Shinigami King." What followed was less a battle than a high-speed training exercise. Zaraki attacked relentlessly, forcing Naruto to utilize different aspects of his Bankai in rapid succession: shadow movement to evade, enhanced perception to anticipate, materialized darkness to defend, and controlled strikes to counter. Throughout the exchange, Naruto maintained conscious awareness of each technique, cataloging the feeling, the spiritual cost, and the effectiveness. This wasn't about winning, it was about learning the full range of his abilities under pressure. "Enough," Yukitaki finally called after several minutes of this high-intensity exchange. "The purpose is refinement, not destruction of the training ground." Zaraki stepped back reluctantly, though his maniacal grin remained fixed in place. Not bad at all. You're learning to fight with that Power instead of just releasing it blindly. Naruto lowered his scythe, noting with satisfaction that his control had remained steady throughout the exchange. The Bankai no longer felt like an overwhelming force barely contained, but an extension of himself, powerful but responsive to his will. Now for the real test, Yoruichi announced, activating another device that projected a complex keto formula into the air above them. Attempt to seal one of the breaches we detected. If you can close even a small one, it would confirm your growing connection to the Shinigami King's authority over dimensional boundaries. Naruto nodded, turning his attention to the nearest breach he had sensed earlier, a small rift approximately half a kilometer from their location. Extending his perception through the sigils around his eyes, he examined the breach's structure, noting how the fabric of reality had been stretched thin and partially torn. Drawing on instinctive knowledge that felt both new and ancient, Naruto raised his free hand toward the distant breach. Shinigami art. Sealing of worlds. Black energy tinged with silver light extended from his palm, not as a destructive blast but as a wavy-ing pattern that stretched across the distance, invisible to normal sight but clear in his enhanced perception. The energy reached the breach and began to stitch the torn edges together, reinforcing the weakened barrier with his own spiritual pressure. The captains watched in fascinated silence as Yoruichi's monitoring devices registered the breach shrinking and ultimately closing completely. He did it, Yukitake murmured, genuine awe in his voice. A technique that normally requires a full ritual and multiple high-level Shinigami. And he made it look easy, Kiraku added, his casual tone belied by the intensity of his gaze. Old Yama was right to fast-track this training. Naruto lowered his hand, a wave of fatigue washing over him despite the power still flowing through his Bankai form. It's not permanent, he cautioned. I can feel whatever's on the other side already applying pressure again. Without the full integration of the Shinigami King's power, I can only manage temporary patches. But it's a start, Yoruichi said encouragingly, and with continued training, a sudden alarm cut through the air, a high-pitched tone that sent the captains immediately to alert status. Breach alarm, Yoruichi explained, consulting a device at his waist. And not a small one this time. Something's coming through in the... He paused, eyes widening slightly, First District of Rukongai. Multiple entities. Captain-class spiritual pressure. Yukitake turned to Naruto. This is sooner than we anticipated, but perhaps not coincidental. Your sealing of one breach may have accelerated their timeline. Or they were waiting for confirmation of my abilities, Naruto suggested grimly, gripping his scythe tighter. Either way, we need to respond. Captains to your divisions, came the telepathic command of Head Captain Yamamoto, broadcast directly to all officers. Coordinate response through 1st Division communications. Naruto Uzumaki and Yoruichi Shihōin will accompany Captain Yukitake and Captain Kiraku to the breach site. As the other captains stepped away to mobilize their forces, Yukitake turned to Naruto and Yoruichi. This will be the first coordinated response to a major incursion. How we handle it will set the tone for our defense strategy moving forward. Then let's make it count, Naruto replied, his Bankai form shifting slightly as he adjusted its configuration for combat rather than training. The sigils around his eyes brightened as he extended his perception toward the breach site. They're coming through now. 5 entities, similar to the Void Walker but smaller, more focused. Void Scouts, Yoruichi identified, her own body tensing for battle. The advance guard that prepares the way for larger incursions. They'll be targeting spiritually significant locations to weaken the overall barrier. Then we stop them here, Kiraku said with uncharacteristic seriousness, drawing both his Zanpakuto. Before they can establish any footholds. Together, the 4 stepped toward the 1st District, moving at speeds that would have been invisible to ordinary souls. As they traveled, Naruto could sense other captain-level Shinigami converging from different directions. A coordinated response to an unprecedented threat. The coming battle would be the first true test of Soul Society's defenses against the Hollow King's forces, and of Naruto's ability to function as the guardian he was becoming. The weight of that responsibility settled on him, not as a burden but as a purpose that aligned with everything he had been in life, a protect. Or of those who couldn't protect themselves. This is why you were chosen, Kujmayo's voice resonated within the transformed weapon he now wielded. Not despite your human heart, but because of it. Then let's show them what that heart can do. Naruto replied silently as they approached the breach, spiritual pressure building around him like a gathering storm. The first district of Rukongai, normal. Why the most peaceful and prosperous area outside the Seraite, had transformed into a battlefield. A massive tear in the spiritual fabric hung in the air above the central plaza, a jagged wound in reality that pulsed with oily darkness. From this breach emerged the 5 entities Naruto had sensed, humanoid figures composed of shifting shadow, each wearing a distinctive bone-white mask with different markings. Unlike the massive, chaotic form of the Void Walker, these Void Scouts moved with tactical precision, immediately spreading out to establish a perimeter around the breach. Their movements were coordinated and purposeful, suggesting intelligence and planning beyond mere destructive impulse. They're securing the area, Yoruichi observed as the 4 of them paused on a rooftop overlooking the plaza. Setting up a base of operations rather than attacking indiscriminately. More concerning is what they're doing to the spiritual landscape, Yukitake added, his experienced eyes tracking subtle changes in the environment. See how the shadows around them are deepening. They're altering the spiritual composition of the area to make it more hospitable for whatever comes next. Hiraku nodded grimly. We need to disrupt their formation before they fully establish themselves. Nanao, he addressed his lieutenant who had joined them moments before, coordinate with the other divisions. Priority is evacuation of civilians and containment of the breach. As Nanao departed to relay the orders, Naruto focused his enhanced perception on the breach itself, studying its structure. Unlike the smaller rift he had sealed during training, this breach was deliberately constructed, reinforced from the other side to prevent easy closure. They've learned from my earlier sealing attempt, he concluded. This breach has been anchored somehow. I can't close it directly without first removing those anchors. The scouts themselves, Yoruichi guessed. Partly, but also those, Naruto pointed to 5 objects the entities had placed at equidistant points around the breach, black crystalline structures that pulsed in rhythm with the tear in reality. Void anchors. As long as they remain active, the breach will stay open regardless of what we do to the scouts. Then our strategy is clear, Yukitake decided. Naruto, focus on neutralizing those anchor points. Captain Kiraku and I will engage the scouts directly to create openings. Yoruichi, your speed makes you ideal for support. Move between objectives as needed to ensure success. Other Shinigami forces were arriving now, lieutenants leading squads from various divisions, taking positions around the district's perimeter to prevent the incursion from spreading. They've noticed us, Kiraku observed as the Void Scouts turned their masked faces toward their position. Empty eye sockets somehow conveying malevolent awareness. No more time for planning, Yoruichi said, her body tensing like a coiled spring. Let's move. They launched into action simultaneously. Yukitake and Kiraku flash-stepped directly into the plaza, their Zanpakuto already released into Shikai form. Yoruichi became a blur of movement, circling the pyramid. To assess weaknesses in the scouts' formation. Naruto, maintaining his Bankai state, approached the nearest anchor point, scythe at the ready. The response from the Void Scouts was immediate and coordinated. 3 moved to engage the captains, while 2 broke off to intercept Naruto, recognizing the primary threat to their operation. Vessel of the False King, 1 communicated directly into Naruto's mind as it attacked with arms that elongated into blade-like appendages. You cannot stop the inevitable. Naruto parried the attack with his scythe, the contact sending cold energy cascading through the entity. Nothing's inevitable except change, he countered, pushing the scout back with a pulse of spiritual pressure. Something your master has never accepted. He spun away from the second scout's flanking attack, using his shadow step technique to phase briefly into darkness before reforming beside the nearest anchor crystal. Without hesitation, he brought his scythe down upon the pulsing object. The crystal resisted the blade momentarily, then cracked with a sound like shattered glass. Dark energy erupted from the fracture, but Naruto was already moving, containing the release with a gesture that channeled the escaping power into his scythe. 1 down, he called to his allies. 4 to go. Across the plaza, Yukitake and Kiraku demonstrated why they were among Soul Society's most formidable captains. Despite the Void Scouts' unusual composition and abilities, the two captains worked in perfect tandem, covering each other's movements and exploiting openings with centuries of practiced coordination. Bushogoma, Kiraku called, spinning his dual blades to create twin whirlwinds that disrupted the scouts' shadowy forms. Yukatake followed immediately, his white hair whipping in the artificial wind. Some no mai, Tsukishiro. His Zanpakuto traced a circle that froze one scout in place, trapping it in a pillar of ice that reached skyward. Yoruichi, meanwhile, demonstrated why she had been called the goddess of flash. Her movements were too fast for even the scouts to track, appearing and disappearing across the battlefield to deliver precisely targeted strikes that disrupted their formation. Naruto, she called, creating an opening by knocking one scout off balance. The second anchor. Now, Naruto flash-stepped to the indicated position, bringing his scythe down on the second crystal. Like the first, it resisted briefly before shattering, its dark energy absorbed into his weapon. The breach visibly contracted as the second anchor fell, its edges becoming less stable. The remaining scouts redoubled their efforts, abandoning tactical restraint for all-out aggression. "Stop him," their collective mental voice commanded, and all five converged on Naruto's position, disengaging from their individual battles to prioritize protecting the remaining anchors. This coordinated assault might have overwhelmed a lesser fighter, but Naruto had faced worse odds in his life as a shinobi. Drawing on both his combat instincts and the Shinigami power flowing through him, he met the attack head-on. Shinigami Art. Shadow Legion. From Naruto's elongated shadow emerged multiple copies of himself. Not the solid shadow clones of his shinobi days, but spectral warriors composed of darkness and spiritual energy. Each wielded a replica of his scythe and moved with a portion of his skill, engaging the scouts to divide their attention. The technique wasn't meant for extended combat. The Shadow Legionnaires would dissipate after a few exchanges, but they provided the distract. Chion Naruto needed to reach the third anchor crystal. As he brought his scythe down on this anchor, however, something changed. The crystal didn't merely crack but exploded in a burst of void energy that washed over Naruto like acid, eating away at his spiritual form. "Naruto!" Yoruichi shouted in alarm, Flash stepping to his side. "I'm okay," he grunted, though the pain was evident in his voice. "They've adapted. Rigged the anchors with some kind of void poison." The breach had contracted further but now pulsed with renewed energy, as if something on the other side was forcing it to remain open despite the loss of anchors. "He comes." The Void Scout's mental voice resonated with a mixture of fear and reverence. "The Harbinger approaches." The breach expanded suddenly, its edges tearing wider. A new spiritual pressure emerged from within, far more concentrated and malevolent than the scouts, approaching captain level in intensity. A figure stepped through the widened tear, humanoid but larger than the scouts. Its body composed not of shifting shadow but of condensed darkness that seemed to absorb light. Instead of a simple white mask, its face was covered by an ornate helmet of bone-white material, decorated with intricate patterns that glowed with inner fire. A Void Lord, Yoruichi identified, tension evident in her stance. They serve as the Hollow King's lieutenants. This just became significantly more dangerous. The Void Lord surveyed the battlefield, its gaze lingering on Naruto's Bankai form. When it spoke, its voice resonated both audibly and mentally, layered with power that pressed against their consciousness. "The vessel grows in strength," it observed, the words precisely articulated unlike the scouts, more primal communication. "Yet remains incomplete." Opportune timing. It raised a hand, and the two remaining anchor crystals pulsed with renewed energy, stabilizing the breach. The Void Scouts regrouped around their superior, their movements now more coordinated and purposeful under its direction. "Captains," the Void Lord addressed Yukatake and Kiraku directly, "your presence is noted but irrelevant. This conflict exists on a plane beyond your jurisdiction. Step aside, and you may yet survive what comes." "Charming invitation," Kiraku replied, his casual tone belying his combat-ready stance, "but we'll have to decline. Soul Society isn't in the habit of surrendering to invasions, no matter how politely requested." The Void Lord's helmet tilted slightly in what might have been amusement. "As expected, your resistance will be documented for historical purposes, brief though it may be." Quote, without further warning, it attacked, not with the straightforward aggression of the scouts, but with terrifying precision. One moment it stood across the plaza. The next it appeared between Yukitake and Kyoraku, hands outstretched to deliver simultaneous strikes that sent both captains flying backward. Impressive speed for beings of your limited dimension, the Void Lord commented as the captains recovered. But ultimately futile. Yoruichi moved next, her flash step carrying her directly into the Void Lord's blind spot. Her attack connected, a Kido Ena NCED strike to what would be a vital point on a normal opponent, but the entity merely absorbed the impact, darkness rippling around her fist like water. The Shihōin princess, it noted, turning to face her. Your lineage is known to us. Your ancestors fought during the first sealing. How fitting that you should witness the undoing of their work. Before Yoruichi could retreat, the Void Lord seized her arm. Darkness spreading from its touch like infection. She cried out, wrenching free, but not before the darkness had spread halfway up her limb. Yoruichi, Naruto called, Flash stepping to her side. The sight of her injured by this entity ignited something primal within him, a protective fury that transcended his rational thoughts. His spiritual pressure spiked dramatically, the sigils around his eyes flaring with intense purple light. The scythe in his hands responded to his emotions, its blade extending and curved edge glowing with silver fire. You've made a mistake, Naruto told the Void Lord, his voice deepening further with the Shinigami's power. Threatening the worlds is one thing. Hurting people I care about is another entirely. The Void Lord seemed to assess this change in Naruto's demeanor with clinical interest. Curious. The vessel retains human attachments despite the integration process. A flaw in the design, perhaps, or, it paused, helmet tilting thoughtfully. An intentional deviation by the previous king. Less talking, more fighting, Naruto growled, shadow stepping directly into the Void Lord's space. What followed was combat on a level few in Seoul society had witnessed. Speed matched with precision, power tempered with technique. The Void Lord proved why it held its exalted rank among the Hollow King's forces, countering Naruto's attacks with defenses that seemed to anticipate his movements. Yet Naruto pushed forward relentlessly, each exchange revealing more about his opponent's capabilities while simultaneously deepening his connection to his own power. The Shinigami aspect of himself provided battle insights from millennia of conflict, while his shinobi training contributed unpredictability and tactical creativity. Meanwhile, Yukitake and Kyoraku engaged the Void Scouts, preventing them from supporting their leader or interfering with Naruto's battle. Yoruichi, despite her injury, targeted the remaining anchor crystals, destroying the fourth with a precisely aimed Kido blast. The breach destabilized further, now held open primarily by the Void Lord's presence and the single remaining anchor. Sensing the shift in momentum, the entity disengaged from Naruto momentarily, its helmet turned toward the weakening tear in reality. Ahead of schedule, but adjustments can be made, it commented, as if to itself. The primary objective remains viable. It raised both hands toward the breach, darkness flowing from its form into the opening. The tear responded, edges stabilizing despite the loss of anchors. More disturbingly, it gone to change shape, from a jagged wound to a more structured portal, its edges aligning to specific geometrical parameters. It's reconfiguring the breach, Yoruichi called out, clutching her darkened arm. Shifting it from a simple entry point to something more permanent. A gateway, the Void Lord confirmed, continuing its work. The first of 7 that will create the path of return for our master. Naruto understood the implications immediately. This wasn't merely an incursion, it was the establishment of infrastructure for a larger invasion. Each stabilized gateway would weaken the overall barrier between realms, eventually allowing the Hollow King to extend his influence directly into Soul Society. Not happening, Naruto declared, raising his scythe. Shinigami art. Reaper's harvest. The scythe's blade ignited with intense silver-black energy as he swept it in a wide arc toward the Void Lord and its forming gateway. The energy released not as a simple attack but as a fundamental negation, a cancellation of unauthorized dimensional manipulation within the Shinigami's domain. The Void Lord moved to block, but the attack wasn't aimed directly at it, rather, it targeted the connection between the entity and the breach. The silver-black energy severed this connection, disrupting the gateway's formation and causing the breach to begin collapsing inward. Unexpected, the Void Lord acknowledged. Genuine surprise evident in its resonant voice. The vessel accesses aspects of the king's authority that should still be dormant. Modification to the timeline is required. It signaled to the remaining Void Scouts, who immediately abandoned their individual battles to converge on the final anchor crystal. Before anyone could intercept them, they merged with the crystal, their foe. RMS dissolving into it and causing it to grow dramatically in size and power. A sacrificial stabilization, the Void Lord explained as the crystal's energy flared, temporarily halting the breach's collapse. Crude but effective for short-term maintenance. The entity turned its full attention to Naruto, its previous clinical interest replaced by focused intent. You have forced an acceleration of our plans, Vessel. The Hollow King will be most interested in your development. It gathered darkness around its form, concentrating its power for what appeared to be a final, decisive attack. Consider this encounter a preliminary assessment. The real test approaches sooner than originally scheduled. Before anyone could respond, the Void Lord launched itself toward Naruto with speed that exceeded even its previous movements. The attack came not as a physical strike but as a spiritual invasion, darkness attempting to penetrate Naruto's Bankai form and corrupt the Shinigami power from within. Naruto met the assault with every defensive technique at his disposal, layering shadow barriers and spiritual pressure to repel the intrusion. Yet some of the darkness slipped through, embedding itself like splinters in his spiritual body. What did you? He began, before a wave of cold pain cut off his words. The Void Lord disengaged, stepping back toward the destabilizing breach. A gift from the Hollow King. A seed of his awareness, planted within the vessel of his ancient enemy. Through it, he will learn your strengths, your weaknesses, and when the time comes, the most efficient way to unmake you. With those ominous words, the entity backed into the collapsing breach. Until our next encounter, Vessel. Grow stronger if you can. It will make your eventual submission all the more satisfying for my master. The breach sealed itself with a final pulse of dark energy, the sacrificed scout's power exhausted. The Void Lord vanished, along with any remaining traces of the incursion, except for the lingering darkness in Yoruichi's arm and the spiritual splinters embedded in Naruto's form. As his Bankai state receded, Naruto fell to one knee, unexpected exhaustion washing over him. The ray where the Void Lord's attack had penetrated his defenses burned cold, like ice against exposed nerves. Yoruichi was at his side instantly, her own injury forgotten in concern for his condition. Naruto, what happened? What did it do to you? Some kind of connection, he managed, focusing inward to assess the damage. Like a tracking seal, but more invasive. I can feel it trying to observe, to learn. Yukitake and Kyoraku joined them, their expressions grim despite the apparent victory in repelling the incursion. We need to get you both to Captain Unohana immediately, Yukitake decided, signaling to nearby Shinigami to prepare for emergency transport. This kind of spiritual contamination is beyond field treatment. The breach is closed, but they achieved part of their objective, Kyoraku observed, looking at where the tear in reality had been. They've mapped a specific pathway and tested our response capabilities. And left calling cards, Naruto added, struggling to his feet with Yoruichi's support. Whatever this thing is inside me, it's meant for something beyond tracking. We'll figure it out, Yoruichi assured him, though her own condition was hardly better, the darkness having spread further up her arm despite her attempts to contain it. Captain Unohana is the best healer in Soul Society. If anyone can extract these contaminants, it's her. As they were escorted back toward the Seraite, Naruto reflected on the encounter with growing concern. The Void Lord had been testing him, yes, but also implementing a specific strategy, one that suggested intimate knowledge of the Shinigami King's power and how it transferred to new vessels. They've done this before, he realized suddenly, the thought emerging from the fragments of ancient memory integrating with his consciousness. Or tried to. Previous transitions were targeted too. What do you mean? Yukitake asked, his scholarly interest piqued despite the urgent situation. The Hollow King has attempted to interfere with the succession of the Shinigami King in previous cycles, Naruto explained, the knowledge crystallizing as he spoke. This isn't opportunism, it's a recurring strategy, refined over multiple attempts. Which means they'll have contingencies for our countermeasures, Kyoraku concluded grimly. This just became even more complicated. Yoruichi squeezed Naruto's hand supportively. Despite the pain evident in her eyes from her own injury. We'll adapt. That's what you do, isn't it? Both as a shinobi and now as the Shinigami. Her confidence bolstered him, even as the cold presence within his spiritual body pulsed with alien awareness. Whatever the Hollow King had planned, whatever this seed was meant to accomplish, Naruto refused to be a passive participant in the ancient entity's schemes. As they approached the 4th Division's healing facilities, his resolve hardened. This was no longer just about accepting a role thrust upon him by circumstance, it was about actively shaping that role to protect what mattered. And after seeing Yoruichi injured, after feeling the Void Lord's casual disregard for the souls under his protection, what mattered had become very clear indeed. The 4th Division headquarters resembled a traditional Japanese hospital, its clean, orderly halls permeated with healing Kido that soothed spiritual disturbances. Captain Unohana, a serene woman with a long braid down her front, met them personally at the entrance, her gentle demeanor belying the immense power Naruto sensed beneath her calm exterior. Captain Yukitake has informed me of the situation, she said, guiding them to a private treatment area. Void contamination requires specialized care. Please follow me. She led them to adjacent treatment rooms separated by translucent screens. As healers began attending to Yoruichi in one section, Unohana herself focused on Naruto, her experienced hands moving in precise patterns over his spiritual body, diagnosing without invasive procedures. Fascinating, she murmured after several minutes of examination. The contamination is unlike anything in our records, yet there's something familiar about its structure. Her eyes, kind but penetrating, met Naruto's. It's reacting to your unique spiritual signature, specifically to the Shinigami aspect of your power. Can you remove it? Naruto asked, wincing as her examination too. UCHED, a particularly sensitive area where the darkness had embedded itself. Not directly, Unohana admitted. It has integrated with your spiritual pathways too thoroughly for conventional extraction. Attempting to forcibly remove it could damage your soul's structure. She paused, considering. However, there may be another approach. She moved to a cabinet and retrieved several vials of luminescent liquid. These are purification serums developed for Shinigami who encounter corruptive spiritual entities. They won't remove the contamination, but they can contain it, prevent it from spreading or transmitting information. As she prepared the treatment, Naruto glanced toward the screen separating him from Yoruichi. What about her? Is her condition similar? Similar in origin but different in manifestation, Unohana replied. The darkness affecting Lady Shihōin is more superficial, a corruption of her spiritual body rather than an implantation. It can be purged with intensive Kido therapy, though the process is not without discomfort. From the other side of the screen came sounds of Kido incantations and Yoruichi's occasional sharp intake of breath, suggesting the discomfort Unohana mentioned was considerably more severe than her gentle phrasing implied. She insisted on immediate treatment despite the pain, Unohana added, noting Naruto's concern. Her resilience is remarkable, even by the standards of the Shihōin clan. As Unohana administered the purification serum through a complex Kido procedure, Naruto felt the cold presence within him retreat, not vanishing completely, but condensing into a smaller, more isolated form. The relief was immediate, allowing him to think more clearly about the implications of the attack. Captain Unohana, he asked as she monitored the serum's effects. In your experience, has anything like this happened before? Targeted contamination of a Shinigami's spiritual body. She considered the question carefully before answering. There are records of hollows attempting to corrupt Shinigami through various means, but nothing with this level of precision or purpose. This was not a random attack, it was specifically designed for you. That's what I thought, Naruto said grimly. The Void Lord called it a seed of awareness. Not just tracking me, but studying me from the inside. Unohana's eyes narrowed slightly. If that's the case, then containing it is only a temporary solution. Eventually, we'll need to find a way to neutralize it completely. Or, Naruto suggested, an idea forming, use it against them. This caught Unohana's attention. What do you mean? If this seed creates a connection, it works both ways. They can observe me, but potentially, I could observe them. Naruto's expression hardened with determination. With the right training, I might be able to reverse the flow of information, learn about the Hollow King's plans through his own surveillance method. Hana studied him with newfound interest. A risky strategy. Such connections can be treacherous, especially when established by beings of ancient power. Risk seems to be part of the job description, Naruto replied with a hint of his old humor. But I won't attempt it without proper preparation. The treatment continued for several hours, alternating between periods of active purification and rest to allow his spiritual body to adjust. During one such rest period, the screen between the treatment areas was partially folded back, allowing Naruto to see Yoruichi on the adjacent bed. The darkness had receded from her arm, though faint. Chi traces remained like intricate tattoos winding around her skin. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady in healing sleep as 4th Division members maintained a complex keto barrier around her. She insisted on taking the most aggressive treatment option, Hana explained, following his gaze. The standard protocol would have taken days to purge the contamination, but she refused to be sidelined for that long. That sounds like her, Naruto said softly, a mixture of admiration and concern coloring his voice. Hana observed this interaction with quiet thoughtfulness. You've formed a strong bond in a short time, she noted. Her tone neutral but her eyes missing nothing. She was the first person here to believe in me, Naruto replied simply. To see me as more than just a potential threat or asset. She's been my guide, my teacher. He paused, realizing there was more he wanted to say but unsure how to articulate it. And something more, perhaps, Hana suggested gently. Naruto didn't confirm or deny this. But his gaze lingering on Yoruichi's sleeping form spoke volumes. Rest now, Hana advised, adjusting the keto barriers around his bed. Both of your treatments will conclude by morning, and the head captain has called a meeting to discuss the next phase of our response to these incursions. As Hana departed, Naruto found himself watching the steady rise and fall of Yoruichi's chest. The subtle indications of healing as her spiritual pressure gradually returned to its normal vibrant state. Something had shifted between them during the battle, a deepening of their connection beyond mentor and student, beyond allies in a common cause. The realization didn't surprise him as much as he might have expected. In the midst of adapting to his new existence, discovering his evolving powers, and confronting ancient threats, Yoruichi had become his constant, the grounding presence that kept him connected to his humanity even as he integrated with the Shinigami King's divine aspects. With that comforting thought, he allowed himself to drift into healing sleep, his consciousness temporarily freed from both the pain of the Void Lord's gift and the weight of his growing responsibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, in the quiet healing space of the 4th Division, he found a moment of much-needed peace. Morning arrived with improved conditions for both patients. Naruto awoke to find the cold presence within him successfully contained, still present but dormant, sealed by Hana's treatment into a state where it could neither spread nor actively transmit information. Yoruichi's recovery was even more dramatic, the darkness almost entirely purged from her arm, leaving only faint silver markings that resembled decorative patterns more than injury. Captain Hana says these will fade completely within a week, Yoruichi explained as they prepared to leave the healing division, flexing her arm to demonstrate its restored functionality. No permanent damage, though she recommends avoiding direct contact with void entities in the future. Solid medical advice, Naruto replied with a smile, relieved to see her returning to her usual confident self. Though somehow I doubt you'll follow it if the situation demands otherwise. Yoruichi's answering grin confirmed his.